I woke up in this world and got a system right away. It gave me a bag with 50 gold coins as startup money, but I could only spend it on buying a slave. Nothing else, one-time deal. So I figured I'd better make it count. I found a slave trader in a hot, stinking city called Calydorn. The guy was pushy, showing me cages full of scared beast-folk kids, but they were too young and small for what I needed. I told him straight, I wanted someone who could fight, was female, and had a good figure. He looked at me funny but said I was in luck. A shipment had just come in from White Mist Island, a place where they train slaves since childhood with drugs and brutal combat. Most don't survive. The ones who do are killing machines. He took me to a rundown building in the back of the market. The moment I walked in, I spotted her, a cat girl standing perfectly still like a statue while every other slave cowered on the floor. Tall, pale skin, cat ears, fluffy tail. Beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Her eyes were dead cold, like someone who'd killed more people than she could count. My system pinged immediately. Legendary unit detected. Her name was Ellie, 18 years old, cat beastkin. Her stats were insane. S rank in agility, intelligence, and perception. Overall quality, legendary. But her loyalty to me was 0. The trader had her demonstrate. They dragged out a corpse, told her to cut it up. She raised her hand without hesitation, sent out wind blades, and shredded it to pieces. Blood everywhere. The other slaves didn't even flinch. They'd seen it before. 50 gold coins. A farmer's entire lifetime of savings. I tossed the bag over without thinking twice. They unlocked her chains. I branded her with the slave mark, a magical bond that would kill her if she killed me. And the system unlocked a Beast Girl Encyclopedia with stat bonuses tied to our relationship level. Then, right after the purchase, the system hit me with a warning. Her loyalty was dangerously low, and she might turn hostile. Great. Could have mentioned that before I spent all my money. I decided not to return Ellie. Yeah, her loyalty was basically 0, and she could kill me without breaking a sweat, but she was a legendary unit. I had to at least try to tame her. I went to the Red Fox Tavern to grab breakfast and find some work. I only had 10 copper coins left. That was everything. I bought 2 bowls of sticky rye porridge and sat down with Ellie in a corner. While she sat across from me staring blankly at the table, I opened up the system encyclopedia to figure out how to raise her loyalty before she decided to stab me in my sleep. The system had some advice. Cat beastkin love meat, so feeding her meat would be a good start. Also, it told me not to force anything because she could kill me with a flick of her finger. Helpful. Problem was, I was flat broke. No meat money. Ellie noticed me looking at her and raised her head. I had to admit, she was stunning. Golden hair, green eyes, flawless skin, perfect figure. The only flaw was those completely empty, lifeless eyes. She glanced down at the porridge. I told her to eat. She grabbed the bowl and devoured it like she hadn't eaten in days, licking it completely clean. I figured it was a good moment to try talking. I told her my name and asked for hers. She said she didn't have one. No parents either. She was an orphan. So I offered to give her a name, Ellie. When I said it, something flickered in those dead eyes of hers. Just for a second. She nodded quietly and didn't say anything else, but the system chimed in. Loyalty jumped to 5%, and her hostility toward me had temporarily disappeared. I exhaled. At least I wouldn't get murdered tonight. Then little Mira came bouncing over, a fox-eared kid, maybe 5 or 6, the tavern owner's daughter. She was always running around causing trouble. She liked me for some reason, always giggling whenever she saw me. I tried to touch her ears, and she punched my leg, then hugged my arm and rubbed her cheek against it. Cute kid. But then she noticed Ellie staring at her with that cold predator gaze, and the poor girl froze, hid behind me, then bolted straight into the kitchen. Her mother Evelyn came out right after, the tavern owner. Long reddish-brown curly hair, lazy seductive eyes, smelled like lavender. She was the most attractive woman in Calydorn, and every mercenary in here knew it, but nobody dared make a move. Rumor was she chopped off a caravan guard's hand a few years back when he tried to get handsy after a few drinks. After that, even the worst thugs behaved themselves inside her tavern. But Evelyn had been kind to me. When I first arrived in this world with nothing, she gave me a bowl of porridge and kept me off the streets. I walked up and asked if she had any jobs. She said no at first, but when she saw Ellie and immediately recognized her as a White Mist Island slave, she raised an eyebrow. She also called me out. I told her before that I was penniless, and now here I was with an expensive combat slave. I dodged the question. Then she got down to business. A merchant guild had posted a request. About 20 goblins had appeared north of the city and robbed a trade caravan yesterday. Someone needed to wipe them out. 10 copper coins per goblin. That was enough for me and Ellie to eat properly. Goblins weren't even that tough. A regular farmer with a pitchfork could handle two. I looked over at Ellie. This would be the perfect chance to test what she could really do. I took Ellie north out of the city to hunt those goblins. The afternoon sun was brutal, and I kept my eyes on the bushes along the road. Bandits like to hide out here and ambush lone travelers, and walking around with a beautiful girl like Ellie made us an easy target. The information Evelyn gave me was vague. The northern wilderness was huge with only a few paths cutting through it. Finding a pack of goblins out here was like searching for a needle in a haystack. After searching for a long time with nothing to show for it, I sat down on a hot rock and asked Ellie if she could sniff them out. She shook her head. Cats are ambush predators, not trackers. That's a dog's job. I made a mental note to buy a dog tribe slave later for tracking purposes. I told her we'd rest a bit and keep looking. While she stood there like a statue, I messed around with the system encyclopedia. I checked Evelyn's profile, Fox Beastkin, level 1 affection, no loyalty score. The system asked me if I was into older women. I shook my head. I was just grateful to her, nothing more. But I realized I'd forgotten to appraise her stats. I'd have to do that next time at the tavern. Then a breeze hit us, and Ellie suddenly lifted her head and sniffed the air. She said she could smell goblins, pointing straight ahead. All I could smell was something like piss. I drew my sword, and we pushed forward through the tall grass. Soon I felt the ground trembling. Hooves. A merchant caravan was coming down the road. The 2 guards at the front spotted us poking out of the bushes and tensed up, but before I could explain ourselves, ropes shot out across the path and tripped them off their horses. A swarm of green goblins rushed out from every direction with knives and clubs, diving into the dust cloud. I told Ellie to help them. She raised her hand, and a blast of wind scattered the dust instantly. The 2 guards were fighting back to back, already bleeding and losing stamina. The merchant was standing on his wagon swinging a metal candlestick at any goblin that got close. A few goblins charged at me, but Ellie dealt with them before they even got close. Her wind blades were invisible, but made a sharp sound as they sliced clean through their necks. The headless bodies kept running for a few steps before collapsing. She mowed them down like it was nothing, green limbs flying everywhere. The whole fight was over in about 10 seconds. The guards were banged up, but alive. One pulled a dagger out of a gap in his armor, wincing hard. The other stared at Ellie and said her magic was incredible. I agreed. She was worth every coin. I asked the merchant if I could claim the goblin kills for the bounty. He didn't care, just happy to be alive. I also offered to escort them back to the city if they'd give us a ride. Deal. I sent Ellie to cut ears off the goblins for proof and collect any loot. The whole haul would net us around 7 or 8 silver coins, enough for food and maybe some new clothes for Ellie. Her current outfit was patched up rags and worn-out straw sandals. A decent set of clothes cost about 6 silver, which I could manage. Proper leather boots, though, were over 10 silver. Leather was expensive and shoemaking was slow, careful work. Way out of reach for now. Money problems were piling up. I sighed and decided we at least deserved a treat tonight. I told Ellie she'd done an amazing job, way beyond my expectations, and asked if she wanted to stuff her face with a big sausage for dinner. We got back to the city while it was still early. I sold all the goblin loot, dirty rags to the tailor near the gate, rusty knives and clubs to the blacksmith in the square. Total came to 370 copper coins, roughly 8 silver. Before I had Ellie, earning that much would have taken me at least a week. We'd killed over 30 goblins, so I still needed to collect the bounty from Evelyn later. But first, food. I took Ellie to the Red Fox Tavern and ordered her a proper meal. A bowl of stew and a smoked sausage, plus black bread and stew for myself. The stew alone cost a full silver coin. Meat was a luxury in this world. Most common folk only ate it on holidays. When I asked Ellie what she wanted to eat, she just froze and stared blankly. She didn't know. Evelyn explained it from behind the counter. White Mist Island slaves were trained into tools. They didn't make choices. So I ordered for her 2 silver coins for a bowl of stew and a sausage, since the system said Cat Beastkin loved meat. I also told her she didn't need to wait for my command for every little thing anymore. Just copy what I do. She said okay, but kept standing there until I pointed at the chair across from me. Then it clicked. At least she could take a hint. The food arrived. The black bread was awful, dry, hard, sour, basically like chewing a brick. only bearable when soaked in the stew broth. I really missed rice from my old world. Ellie didn't touch her food until she remembered what I'd said about copying me. Then she absolutely demolished everything. Stew, sausage, bread, gone in under 5 minutes. She even licked the bowl clean. I asked why she ate so fast. She mumbled that on the island, you had to fight others for food. If you were slow, you starved. I told her she could slow down now. Nobody was going to steal her meal. Then I asked if she was full. She lowered her head and whispered that she wasn't. A whole bowl of stew and a sausage, and she was still hungry. I pushed my leftover bread over to her. The system chimed in, loyalty up to 10%. Apparently feeding her stew gave 5%. At this rate, if I kept her well fed, I could max out her loyalty eventually. The system also explained that higher loyalty made affection grow faster, which unlocked better rewards. I left Ellie eating and walked over to the counter to talk to Evelyn. That's when I used the system to appraise her stats. Another legendary unit, Fox Beastkin, 26 years old, S-rank intelligence, A-rank agility, and perception. She had a ridiculously long full name too. And at the bottom of her stat screen, there was an option to view detailed body measurements. I tapped it without a second of hesitation, but it wouldn't open no matter how many times I pressed. The system was messing with me. It even commented, "So you do like older women." I was standing there tapping the air like an idiot when Evelyn interrupted, asking if I'd been cursed by a demon. I'd been waving my hands in front of her face for a while. I played it off. Little Mira came running out of the kitchen again, grabbed my leg, and looked up at me. I tried to touch her ears, and she bit my hand. That little fox always nipped when we played. She pointed at Ellie and asked who the pretty lady was. I told her Ellie was my maid. Evelyn came over, took Mira back with a warning about being locked upstairs, and handed her off to a waitress. I leaned on the counter and got to business. I handed over the bag of 32 goblin ears, 7 silver coins worth of bounty. Evelyn counted them out, then narrowed her eyes at me and asked when I planned to pay the rent I owed her. I looked at the coins, looked at her, and after a moment asked if I could borrow some more money instead. Evelyn paid me the bounty, but refused to lend me any more money. Fair enough. I'd pay her back with interest once I had more cash. After dinner, I took Ellie to my place, a rundown house in the slums that Evelyn was renting to me. The neighborhood was awful, narrow mud paths, gutters full of filth, beggars and thugs everywhere. On the way there, I passed a collapsed house inside. Most buildings in the slums were made with wood frames and mud walls since nobody could afford stone. They'd crumble in 20 or 30 years. My house was the same type, and I quietly prayed it wouldn't fall on me while I slept. We stopped in front of a slightly cleaner-looking shack. Rent in the city wasn't cheap. Even a drafty slum house cost 20 or 30 silver for half a year, plus a deposit up front. But Evelyn had been generous. She charged me half price and let me move in first, pay later. Without her, I'd have been sleeping on the streets. I told Ellie to bear with the conditions for now. She scratched her ear and said nothing. Inside it was dark and smelled like mold. I asked Ellie to light the oil lamp. She flicked a flame from her fingertip and lit it instantly. Before her, lighting that thing with a flint took me half an hour. Having a magic user around was already paying off. The place was bare, one room with a broken wooden bed in the corner, a clothing chest, and a small fire pit that I'd never used. Nothing else. There was only one bed, so I grabbed some of Evelyn's old clothes from the chest and arranged them on the floor in a little nest shape. A cat bed for the cat girl. I felt a bit embarrassed telling Ellie to sleep there, but she didn't complain. She just sat down on the pile quietly, hugged her knees, and stared into space. She looked small and pitiful curled up like that. I promised I'd buy her a proper bed once we had the money. I pointed out the water jar by the fire pit in case she wanted to wash her face. Then something occurred to me. I asked if she could make water with magic. In the 2 weeks since I'd arrived in this world, taking a bath had been a nightmare. You had to haul water from the public well trip after trip to fill the tub. Most locals only bathed once every couple of weeks. She said yes. She set the tub upright, poured clean water out of thin air, rinsed the tub first, refilled it, and it was ready. My eyes lit up. Bath freedom at last. I stripped down and jumped in. Ellie stood there watching at first, then seemed to realize that wasn't appropriate, turned to face the wall, and even folded her ears flat against her head. After I finished and changed into clean clothes, I told her she could bathe too if she wanted. She glanced at me, said nothing, then just pulled off her shirt right there without a hint of shyness. Underneath, her chest was tightly wrapped in cloth strips. She unwound them and, well, The view was extremely generous. She clearly didn't care about being seen. She undressed completely and stepped into the tub. When she got out, she didn't even bother drying off before reaching for her clothes. I tossed one of Evelyn's old shirts onto her wet hair and told her to dry off first. She wiped down methodically, hair, then every inch of skin. Then, without being asked, she picked up my dirty clothes, put them in the tub, and started scrubbing them clean. Laundry service included, apparently. I thanked her softly. My eyelids were getting heavy. It had been an exhausting day, buying a slave in the morning, killing goblins in the afternoon. I told her to get some rest after she finished the laundry. Tomorrow we'd go back to the tavern for work, and once we earned enough I'd buy her some proper clothes and shoes. She said goodnight and called me master. She wrung the clothes out, hung them by the fire pit to dry, then sat quietly on her little pile of clothes, watching me fall asleep. Next morning I took Ellie to the tavern early and picked up a job clearing skeletons near a small village outside the city. The village chief posted it because his farmers were too busy with harvest season to deal with the monsters themselves. Skeletons were even easier than goblins, so Evelyn priced them at 5 copper each. Fair enough. On the way out I asked Ellie how she slept. She said, fine, but looked exhausted. I told her to be honest. Her ears drooped, and she admitted she slept badly. I hadn't slept well either. The bed was just a thin layer of straw on hardwood planks, basically like sleeping on concrete. I counted my money. 3 silver and 8 copper. I needed to buy Ellie clothes, shoes, and eventually a decent mattress. Everything cost money. Ellie said the bed wasn't the problem though. When she was young on White Mist Island, they made her drink a potion that kept her alert even while sleeping. The side effect was she could never sleep deeply. Any small noise would wake her. I asked if I could drink something like that too. She said I could, but there was a 50% chance it would kill me. The effect would last until she died. I got curious about her past and kept asking questions. She answered every one, no emotion on her face. White Mist Island was worse than the rumors. 100 slaves would be captured and forced to drink over a dozen different toxic potions that enhanced physical abilities, endurance, reflexes, eyesight, magic capacity. Most died from the poison alone. Only 3 or 4 survived that stage, and the dead were thrown into the sea. For the survivors, the nightmare was just beginning. They were forced to torture and kill small animals first, then living people. The trainers constantly twisted their minds, reshaping their sense of right and wrong. Some couldn't take the guilt and tried to kill themselves. Failed attempts were punished even more brutally. Ellie described all of this without any expression, remembering every detail perfectly. Just listening made me feel sick. I told her to stop. She went quiet. A few steps later, she suddenly threw her arm out to block me, her eyes sharp, ears flattened back. Bandits in the bushes ahead. She sensed several of them. Before Ellie, I would have turned and run. Not anymore. I told her to kill them. 2 crossbow bolts flew out of the trees straight at our faces. In a flash, Ellie's wind magic blasted them apart. The shockwave flattened the grass on both sides of the road and knocked the bandits off their feet. Before they could stand, invisible wind blades swept across their necks one by one. Heads rolled. It was over in seconds. The blast nearly deafened me. I told Ellie her magic packed a serious punch, and she'd earned an extra chicken leg for dinner. I searched the bodies. These bandits were dirt poor, only about 50 copper coins between all of them. But their gear was worth something. 2 old crossbows, some rusty daggers and axes, and since Ellie had cut their heads off cleanly, their clothes were intact and could be sold too. I estimated the total loot at around 30 silver, 3 times what I earned killing goblins yesterday. Turns out robbing robbers was way more profitable than clearing monsters. I told Ellie to hide the loot so we could grab it on the way back. She crouched down, touched the ground, and a pit opened up. She pushed the bag in and sealed it with earth. No trace left behind. I nodded, already doing math in my head. Buy Ellie proper clothes and shoes first, and with whatever was left over. Maybe I should buy another slave. I had Ellie try out a sword on the skeletons just to test her close combat skills. She was flawless, every strike precise, perfect speed and power, never needing a second swing on the same target. None of the mercenaries at the tavern could match her swordsmanship. I made a mental note to feed her extra tonight. After the fight, I dug magic crystals out of the skeleton remains, small black stones inside their chests. Evelyn said those were what I needed to collect for the bounty. When I pried one out with a dagger, the bones crumbled to dust with an eerie groan. Ellie was faster, scooping up 7 or 8 crystals in no time. On the way back, we dug up the bandit loot from the morning. The 2 crossbows and weapons only sold for 15 silver, way less than I expected. The bloodstained clothes were even harder to sell, but I finally got 8 silver for them after some haggling. Combined with Evelyn's bounty payment, the day's total was 25 silver, bringing me to 37 overall. I took Ellie to the market to pick out a dress. She stood in front of the stall for ages, unable to decide. Evelyn was right. She'd had the ability to choose taken from her since childhood. The tailor got impatient and made a rude comment about her being a dirty slave, which annoyed me since the guy himself clearly hadn't bathed in weeks. I stepped in and helped her pick a light blue fitted dress. It was the least ugly option. With her figure, she'd look great in anything. She looked at it carefully and said she liked it. 7 silver coins. Then I headed for the slave market. The moment Ellie saw the cages, she grabbed my sleeve and wouldn't let go. She stared at me and quietly begged me not to send her back. I realized she thought I was returning her, like the slave trader had offered. I told her I was just buying another slave, not getting rid of her. She held on for a while before finally letting go. The slave trader from yesterday spotted us and came over. I told him what I needed: a dog tribe slave with a good nose for tracking, combat capable, female, and well-built. He asked if I meant big-chested again. I launched into a long explanation about how extra mass in that area provides organ protection and helps with upper body balance. He just waved his hand like he'd heard it all before and went to check his stock. While we waited, I noticed Ellie looking down at her own chest, lost in thought. I asked what she was staring at. She mumbled, "Nothing." The trader came back and said he didn't have any dog tribe slaves that fit, but he had a wolf tribe one that might work. Wolves and dogs aren't that different when it comes to sense of smell. Wolves might even be better overall. I told him to show me. She was a dirty little wolf girl crouched in the corner of the cage, gray-black short hair, cute triangular wolf ears, and golden eyes like crystals. Short too, maybe 5 feet tall. I was almost 2 heads taller than her. Then I noticed it. Unbelievable. The size of those things. Her ragged clothes could barely contain them. If Ellie's were melons, this girl's were watermelons. I used the system to appraise her. Name: Maeve. 18 years old, wolf beastkin. Her stats were honestly pretty bad compared to Ellie. D in strength and intelligence, C in endurance and perception, B in agility. But her luck was S rank, and her overall quality was rare. The system teased me with a view detailed body measurements button again. I refused to fall for that trick twice. The intelligence D worried me. Looking at her face, mouth slightly open, almost drooling, glancing around aimlessly, I wasn't sure this girl was all there. But I only needed her nose for tracking, and that S-rank luck might come in handy. Good enough for now. The trader wanted 80 silver. I offered 10. He nearly choked. I bumped it to 20. He complained that I'd thrown 50 gold coins around yesterday without blinking, but now I was haggling over pocket change. I told him straight, she wasn't worth 80. She was clearly not the sharpest tool. I leaned in and promised him future business, especially if more White Mist Island slaves came in. Big ones. He stared at me, grabbed my pile of mixed coins without even counting, and told me to follow him. I checked with the system first. Would this one try to kill me? The system said no, she was safe. Good enough. They dragged Maeve out of the cage, and she thrashed around yelling that she could walk on her own. I told them to let her go. After branding her with the slave mark, I headed toward the tavern with both girls. On the way, Ellie tapped my shoulder and pointed beside her. Maeve was gone. She'd bolted into a dark alley the moment we weren't watching. Great. The system was right. She wouldn't stab me. She'd just run away instead. I closed my eyes and activated the brand. Seconds later, Maeve came stumbling out of the alley stiff as a board, tail hanging limp behind her. The moment I released the control, she collapsed on the ground gasping. I asked if she was stupid. She'd just been branded and already forgot it worked. She started blubbering that she wasn't really trying to escape. She just wanted to test if the mark actually did anything. I asked how the test went. She sobbed that yes, it definitely worked, and she surrendered. Her crying was so sudden and dramatic, ears twitching with every sob, looking like the most wronged creature alive. She was either genuinely dumb or a fantastic actress. I warned her there wouldn't be a next time. She wiped her tears and promised she'd never run again. We started walking. A few seconds later, I heard her muttering behind me. I turned around and caught her glaring at Ellie, whispering, "You traitor," at the tavern. I ordered dinner, half a stewed chicken plus a bowl of stew for Ellie as her reward, a bowl of stew and vegetable soup for myself, and for Maeve, just a block of hard black bread. She tried to run away earlier, so she had to earn her meals. The whole dinner cost 7 silver. I introduced myself and Ellie to Maeve. She told me her name was Maeve, given to her by her mother. At least she had one. That was more than Ellie could say. When the food arrived, Maeve's eyes went wide at the spread on the table. She grabbed Ellie in a hug and said she understood now why Ellie didn't help her escape, because the food here was amazing. Ellie quietly pushed her away, clearly not a fan of being touched. I gave Ellie her chicken and stew. She ripped off a drumstick immediately and went to town on it. The chicken was old and tough with barely any seasoning, but she didn't care. She even crushed and swallowed the bones. The system reported her loyalty climbing, 15, 20, 25%. One chicken got her to 25. Not bad at all. Maeve looked at her single piece of bread, and her ears drooped like the world had ended. I told her if she wanted Ellie's treatment, she'd have to work hard tomorrow. She bit into the bread without another word, chewing loudly. Her starting loyalty was already at 61% though. Ellie had started at 0. I was lucky to still be alive. Maeve spent the next few minutes staring at Ellie's chicken, drooling onto her own shirt. She inched closer and begged for just one tiny bite. Ellie silently slid her bowl away and started eating faster. She was protective of her food. Watching Maeve, I thought she didn't seem like a wolf at all. More like a dog, those innocent but sneaky puppy eyes begging for scraps, the shameless sucking up, the cowardly guilt after getting caught running. I just hoped I hadn't bought a useless glutton. I couldn't watch her suffer anymore. I ordered half a bowl of stew and pushed it in front of her. She couldn't believe it. I told her if she asked again I'd take it back. She snatched the bowl and inhaled the food, mumbling happily with her mouth full. Loyalty shot up to 70%. Evelyn came by and noticed Maeve. I handed over the bag of skeleton crystals, 30 kills, 150 copper. Evelyn looked inside, then said flatly that since I had money for new slaves, but not for rent, she'd be keeping the bounty. I tried to protest, but she just handed me 5 silver coins and walked away. Little Mira came charging out of the kitchen and slammed into me like a bull. I joked about her never letting me touch her ears. She looked up and said if I were her man, she'd let me. I paused. This kid was 5 or 6 and already talking like that. Evelyn's face went dark and she warned Mira to stop talking nonsense or she'd never be allowed outside again. Mira muttered that her mom was a tiger. Then Mira spotted Maeve and asked who she was. I said she was my second maid. I used the distraction to sneak a quick pet of Myra's fox ears. Soft, fluffy, warm. She bit my hand immediately. Still no ear touching allowed. Maeve put down her bowl, face covered in broth, and called Mira adorable, reaching out her arms. Mira almost went to her, but Evelyn pulled the kid away. She wasn't letting her daughter play with someone who looked that dumb. Maeve scratched her cheek, confused. I told her the problem was obvious. She stank. Nobody wanted to be held by someone that dirty. I told her I'd give her a proper bath when we got home. After dinner, I brought both of them back to our cramped little house. With 3 people now, it felt even smaller. Maeve looked around nervously and asked if the place was really safe from collapsing. I told her Evelyn had reinforced it with magic, so it should hold for now. Once I had more money, I'd rent something bigger near the square. Ellie walked past me and carefully folded her new blue dress. I told her to wash it first since who knows how many people had touched it at the market. She took it to the tub and started cleaning it gently. She clearly treasured it. I suggested she try it on first to check the fit. We all needed baths anyway after running around in the summer heat all day. She nodded and changed right there. Unfortunately, she still had those cloth wraps around her chest, so I could only see the outline. When she had it on, she stood there holding the hem and swayed side to side. She looked stunning. The light blue fabric hugged every curve perfectly. Then I noticed the neckline was much lower than I'd realized. I'd accidentally picked a low-cut dress. I cleared my throat and told her honestly that she was the most beautiful beastkin I'd ever seen, and that her eyes looked like they had stars in them. She nodded without a word and quickly took the dress off to fold it again. She seemed a little embarrassed. Maeve complimented Ellie too, then immediately sat down and asked when she could eat again. I couldn't believe it. We'd literally just come from the tavern. She was a bottomless pit. I told her I only eat 2 meals a day. She flopped on the floor and groaned, clutching her stomach. I dug around in the pot above the fire pit and found a piece of black bread from days ago. It was rock hard, but still edible. That stuff lasted years if kept dry. I tossed it to Maeve, and she leaped up and caught it in her mouth like a dog. While she ate, I tested something. I asked her if we were friends, putting the master-slave thing aside. She nodded seriously and said, "Of course." I gave her meat, so we were friends. The system panel appeared instantly. Maeve's affection had jumped to level 2, become friends, was now complete. The reward was a 15% boost to my strength, endurance, and agility. I felt it immediately. My body got warmer, my muscles tightened. I lifted my shirt and my abs were visibly more defined. Ellie's bonus was only 5%, while Maeve's was 10. I asked the system why Evelyn didn't count since she was also my friend. It said she had to admit it herself. So I went over to Ellie and asked her seriously if we were friends. She answered flatly, "I'm a slave." I told her to just say we were friends. She repeated the words obediently, but the system bonus didn't change. The system explained she had to truly believe it in her heart. Forced words didn't count. I stood facing the wall for a minute to calm down. Then it was bath time. Maeve looked at the tub and got shy, asking where exactly she was supposed to bathe. I said right here in the room. She squinted nervously, clearly worried I'd peek. She suddenly pretended to be sleepy and said she'd just go to bed. I told her not to worry. She wasn't even half as pretty as Ellie, and I had zero interest. She opened her eyes, pouted, and muttered that was a good thing. I bathed first with Ellie pouring water. Then Ellie took her turn. Same as yesterday. She stripped without caring that I was right there, wraps and all. Her cat ears twitched softly on top of her head while she washed. And watching her, a bold idea started forming in my mind. After Ellie and I finished bathing, Maeve finally made her move. She pulled the clothesline loose to make a curtain and dragged the tub behind it. I was impressed. That was actually clever for someone I assumed was an idiot. She poked her head out and tried to get Ellie's attention with hissing noises, wanting her to fill the tub with magic water. Ellie ignored her completely. Maeve begged. Ellie sat like a statue. Maeve looked at me for help, but I shrugged. I wasn't going to force Ellie to do anything she didn't want to. Eventually, Maeve tried to hug Ellie to win her over, but Ellie dodged. Turns out Ellie was just disgusted by how dirty Maeve was, so she got up and filled the tub anyway. Before getting in, Maeve peeked out and nervously asked me not to watch her bathe. She'd clearly already decided I was a pervert. So I leaned into it and made a creepy joke about needing to strengthen our bond by having a baby. She came out of the curtain looking tragic and said she'd skip the bath entirely. I waved her off and told her to just go wash. She stank so bad, even Ellie couldn't stand it. She cheered up and hopped into the tub, splashing water everywhere. I warned her about getting the dry clothes wet. She said magic water evaporates fast, unlike normal water. Ellie confirmed it with a nod. Once Ellie's hair was dry, I put my plan into action. I asked if I could touch her ears. She looked at me strangely. I told her they looked soft and pretty, and if she didn't want me to, that was fine. She thought about it for a few seconds, then sat on the edge of my bed and tilted her head toward me. I touched a beastkin's ears for the first time. It was incredible, soft fur sliding between my fingers, the ear warm and springy. After a while it started getting hot. I looked down and saw Ellie's cheeks had turned red, her skin flushed a deep rose color. The system reported loyalty jumping to 30%, and her affection hit level 2, become friends, was now complete. My total stat boost went up to 20%. Apparently ear touching was a major bonding move. The system warned me that if I tried this yesterday, she would have killed me. Timing mattered. I went through my best cat petting techniques, rubbing, pinching, stroking. Ellie stayed composed on the surface, but her breathing got unsteady. Maeve had finished her bath and came out in her old patched-up clothes, watching us with drooping ears. She asked in a shaky voice if she'd have to get her ears touched too. Her face was clean now, and she was actually pretty cute. Not on Ellie's level, but solidly above average. And her figure was beyond impressive. Ellie seemed embarrassed and pulled away slightly. When I let go, she immediately retreated to her corner and sat there staring at nothing. I couldn't tell if she was refusing or just shy. I turned to Maeve and beckoned her over to let me touch her wolf ears. She instantly pretended to fall asleep, going completely still like a corpse. I tossed a set of my clean clothes onto her since her own were falling apart and reeked. She changed behind the curtain, then poked her head out asking if I had any chest wraps. I told her I was a man. Why would I have those? She said without wraps they were too big. I told her to show me how big. She peeked out for half a second and ducked back. Even through the shirt, they looked a full size bigger than before. Absolutely ridiculous. She came out holding her chest, pants rolled up since my clothes were way too long on her. I told both of them to get some rest. We had work again tomorrow. Next morning, Maeve bounced along behind me like a kid on a field trip. She'd slept great and eaten well. Ellie was the opposite, still exhausted from another sleepless night thanks to that permanent drug in her system. We got to the tavern planning to grab a job and leave, but Maeve kept whining about being hungry, so I had to stop and buy breakfast. She happily munched on black bread and announced with a big grin that being a slave was wonderful because she finally got to eat. The mercenaries around us stared at her like she was insane. Evelyn overheard and commented that Maeve was just lucky to have a decent master. Most slaves lived miserable lives. Maeve looked at Evelyn with envy and asked how her master treated her, assuming anyone who ran a tavern must eat well. Evelyn ignored her. I explained that Evelyn wasn't a slave, she was the owner. Maeve couldn't believe a fellow beastkin could walk around free without getting captured. I didn't fully understand the details myself, having only been in this world for about 2 weeks. All I knew was that Evelyn had citizenship recognized by the kingdom. We took a goblin clearing job and headed out. Goblins had been pouring out of the underground near the northern part of the city, so there'd be plenty of work for a while. On the way, I questioned Maeve about her skills. It was painful. She was the polar opposite of Ellie. She couldn't use a sword, couldn't use a bow, couldn't use magic. She could do absolutely nothing useful in a fight. I sighed. She'd only cost me the price of 10 bowls of stew, so I shouldn't have expected much. She proudly told me she was great at farming. Before being captured, she'd helped her mother work the fields. I told her we were mercenaries, not farmers. She offered that she could also do laundry. I gave up and told her to just be our lucky charm and try not to die. She cheered and started hopping around me happily. Meanwhile, I reached over and pinched Ellie's ear. She flinched. I caught her off guard and closed one eye while her tail swayed behind her. Ever since last night, I'd been addicted, and now I had a new goal. Someday, I wanted to get my hands on that fluffy tail. Maeve saw this and backed away, terrified her ears were next. She said touching Ellie's it should be enough. I raised an eyebrow and threatened to sell her. She burst into tears, grabbed onto me, and begged not to be sold because she'd finally found a place where she could eat. Then between sobs, she added that if I really had to sell her, could I please sell her to Evelyn? At least she'd never go hungry there. Food was her whole world. She told me earlier that she actually had a family, but they abandoned her because she ate too much. She was wandering the forest looking for people when she fell into a slave trader's trap. I pointed out that for someone who claimed to have starved, she sure didn't look underfed, especially up top. She got angry and slapped her own chest, ranting about how those useless things stole all her nutrition and kept her hungry. I reached out to give them a slap too, but she dodged and guarded herself. She told me to go bother Ellie's instead. Ellie turned around and gave Maeve a look so cold she immediately shut up. I shrugged it off. No rush. Someday. I told Maeve she still needed to learn basic self-defense, so Ellie would be her teacher. Ellie nodded. She seemed quite willing to train her. Maeve sighed and agreed. Then 2 minutes later complained that walking was exhausting and asked when we could rest. We'd gone maybe 2 kilometers. I told her if she was that tired, she might as well ride on my head. Maeve actually tried to climb onto my neck when I made that joke about carrying her. She managed to get up there after a few jumps, but she was heavy as a pig and kept squirming. My knees nearly gave out after a few steps. I threatened her, and she hopped off, then stood behind me with her hands on her hips grinning like an idiot. She was getting too cocky, so I raised my hand to activate the slave brand. She instantly dropped to her knees and apologized. Too late. I made her slap her own, but 100 times as punishment. Afterward, she rubbed her red backside and pouted that she'd never play with me again. I pulled out a piece of goblin cloth Evelyn had given me and shoved it under Maeve's nose so she could track the scent. She gagged and tried to run. One look from me, and she reluctantly sniffed it, closed her eyes, then led us into the thick bushes. While following her, I couldn't help myself. I started petting Ellie's head. Her golden hair was thick and soft. Loyalty crept up to 31%. She seemed to enjoy the head pats, even though she never said anything. Then I saw her fluffy cat tail swaying behind her and couldn't resist. I leaned in and whispered that I wanted to touch her tail. She turned to look at me with that blank expression, but then actually lifted her tail toward me. I grabbed it immediately and started stroking it back and forth. The fur slid through my fingers beautifully. After exactly 2.5 seconds, she yanked it away and walked faster. Her neck had turned red. I chased after her to keep going. Maeve came back from scouting just then, saw me playing with Ellie's tail, and swallowed whatever she was about to say. Her own wolf tail tucked between her legs. She asked nervously if she'd have to get her tail touched too. I beckoned her over. She panicked and blurted out that she'd accidentally peed on her tail this morning. I said I didn't mind. She nearly cried and begged me to stop. I let her off the hook and asked what she'd found. She reported a goblin camp ahead. The smell was overwhelming. Buying her had been the right call. Her nose saved us hours of searching. She wanted to hide while Ellie did the fighting. I handed her my sword and told her she was going in too. She laughed nervously, hoping I was joking. I wasn't. She reluctantly took the sword and stood next to Ellie. By the time I caught up, the fight was already over. Ellie had killed all 8 goblins, every one of them headless. Maeve wiped sweat off her forehead and declared it had been an intense battle. I glanced at the sword she'd been holding. It was spotless. She hadn't done a thing. I told them to search the camp. Maeve ran to 2 wooden crates near the edge and started digging through them. She yelled for me to come look. Inside were piles of linen fabric, probably stolen from a merchant caravan. I estimated the haul at around 50 silver coins. A serious windfall. I announced we'd eat well tonight. Usually Maeve would have been the first to cheer, but she was oddly quiet. I turned around and found her poking at something in the tall grass with a stick while Ellie watched. I walked over and saw what they'd found, a rocky hole in the ground, just big enough for one person to squeeze through. I tossed a rock down the hole. It bounced around for a few seconds before going silent. Ellie shot a fireball inside, so I could see. The tunnel went straight down about 20 or 30 meters before hitting a sharp turn. Goblins came from the underground world, so this was probably how they'd been getting to the surface. Maeve got excited and wanted to explore. I ignored her and asked Ellie if she'd ever been underground. She said a few times. I'd heard stories at the tavern about the underground world, a completely different place full of dangerous monsters and hidden treasure. Maeve's eyes lit up at the word treasure. But Ellie said flatly that the deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. No way I was going down there without knowing what we'd face. I told Ellie to seal the hole. She crouched down, touched the ground, and filled it with rock. I stomped on it a few times, solid. Good enough. We packed up the loot and headed back to the city. Ellie scouted ahead while Maeve and I carried the heavy crates, sweating through our clothes. I sold the goblin weapons and clothing first, then took the linen fabric to a tailor with a proper shop. Total income, 50 silver coins. I looked at Ellie still wearing her old rags and bought both her and Maeve light brown work dresses, 15 silver for both. Maeve hugged her new dress with the biggest smile I'd ever seen and declared eternal loyalty on the spot. The system confirmed her loyalty had jumped to 80%. Yesterday, it was 60. At this rate, she'd max out by tomorrow. I asked if a simple dress was really all it took to buy her loyalty. She said, of course, it was her first new piece of clothing ever. Back home, she'd always worn her sister's hand-me-downs. Her family couldn't afford new clothes. She told me I looked like I came from a wealthy family since my clothes had no patches and were clean. I told her that wasn't true, but honestly, life in my old world was incomparably better than here. I teased her about running off if someone offered a prettier dress. She shook her head firmly and swore she was loyal. Where else could she eat full meals and get new clothes? She was sticking with me. Then I noticed Ellie's straw sandals were falling apart. I took her to the shoemaker and spent 20 silver on a decent pair of short boots. Even the shoemaker questioned whether a slave deserved such nice shoes. I said of course she did. Ellie sat on a stool holding the boots in her arms, looking lost. I asked if something was wrong. Wrong size, uncomfortable? She shook her head and said they fit fine. I asked why she wasn't putting them on. After a brief hesitation, she slipped them on, stood up, and walked around. They fit well. Maeve watched with obvious envy, then nudged me and whispered that her sandals were almost broken too. I couldn't afford another 20 silver, so I got her a cheap pair of straw sandals for now. She'd get proper shoes once we earned more. Maeve looked down at her new sandals and grinned like she'd won the lottery. She spun around me in circles, thanking me. I asked if I could touch her ears as a thank you. She froze completely. After a long pause, she mumbled quietly that if I really wanted to. It wasn't impossible. We headed to the tavern around noon for lunch. On the way, Ellie kept looking down at her new boots while walking, afraid of scuffing them on rocks. I told her shoes were meant to be worn. If they broke, I'd buy new ones. She nodded obediently, and I gave her ears a quick pat as a reward. Then I reached for Maeve's ears, but she dodged before I even got close. She said she'd agreed to let me touch them at night, but doing it outside felt weird. Fine, I'd be patient. When we arrived, the tavern was shut. That was unusual. Evelyn only closed at curfew. I knocked and called out, but nobody answered. Inside looked like a mess through the window. A young mercenary sitting nearby told me what happened. Mira had run off around noon, and Evelyn panicked, kicked everyone out, and went searching. That explained the chaos inside. Mira was always running around, and Evelyn must have lost her mind with worry. Maeve rubbed her belly and asked where we'd eat instead. I called her a pig, ran to a food stall, and bought 2 chicken legs, one for each of them. Ellie chewed hers a few times and swallowed it bones and all. Maeve inhaled hers in a single bite and immediately asked for more. I told her she'd get more food after we found the kid. Evelyn had helped me when I first arrived in this world with nothing. For that one bowl of porridge alone, I owed her. I had to help find Mira. I told Maeve to use her nose. She needed something with the girl's scent first, so she decided to climb through the tavern window to find a toy or something. Ellie offered to go instead, saying she was better at squeezing through tight spaces. Maeve refused, insisting she was the right one for the job. She struggled up to the window, managed to shove her chest through, and then her, but got completely stuck. Her legs kicked in the air while she yelled for me to push. I couldn't help myself. I gave her backside a slap first. She screamed about my cruelty. Then I pushed her the rest of the way in. After a while, a hand appeared through the window holding a loaf of black bread. I yelled at her. I'd sent her in to find a scent, not to steal food. And if she was going to steal, at least take something valuable. She said she'd already found the scent too, and held out a small wooden doll, Myra's favorite toy. I'd seen the kid playing with it at the counter many times. I told her to hurry. Most human kingdoms weren't friendly to beastkin. A beastkin child wandering alone in the city was in real danger. She could have already been snatched and shipped off to White Mist Island. Getting Maeve back out was another ordeal. Her butt got stuck again. I grabbed her arms and pulled until she popped free, catching her in my arms. She was absurdly heavy, like holding a 200-pound pig. I told her to lose some weight. She jumped down, snatched the bread from Ellie, broke off a piece, and offered it to me. I declined. She asked what I did like so she could go back in and steal it. I pinched her cheeks and shoved Myra's toy under her nose, telling her to start tracking before I used the brand on her. She sighed and started sniffing. Maeve led us through half the city following Myra's scent. We ended up all the way at the north gate, which made no sense. The tavern was in the south. A kid couldn't wander that far on her own. Maeve said the city smells were making tracking harder, but she was getting close. She could tell Mira had been with several men, and that the girl was scared. I asked how she could possibly smell fear. She explained that people give off different scents depending on their emotions. Fear smells different from calm, and bad intentions have their own stink too. She added that she could always smell when I was about to mess with her, which was why she dodged so fast. Good to know. Next time I'd skip the build-up and just go for it. While Maeve scouted ahead, I walked beside Ellie and tried to get her talking. She was so quiet it was like having a mute companion. I pinched her cheek and asked her to say more. She said she didn't know what to talk about. I asked her to smile. She forced out something stiff and crooked. Still pretty, somehow. I got her talking about her magic instead. She called it killing magic. Wind blades that needed no chanting, flew extremely fast, and were perfect for mid-to-close range against unarmored targets. I asked if she could cut through plate armor. Usually no, but she could increase her magic output when necessary, though it drained more energy. Maeve came running back and said she'd found Mira. She led us into a rundown alley where the buildings looked ancient and half-collapsed. She sniffed around a few doors, then pointed at a crumbling old house with a rotting door and vines covering the walls. She was certain the kid was inside. Ellie listened with her ears perked up and confirmed 4 or 5 people and a child crying. I figured someone had a grudge against Evelyn. In her line of work, conflicts with clients happened all the time. Kidnapping a kid wasn't beyond these people. I suggested I could distract them from the front while Ellie snuck in from behind. She shook her head and said that was completely unnecessary. She'd go straight through the front. I reminded her the child's safety came first. She said her speed would handle that. I trusted her judgment. I told her to go. She raised her hand. I grabbed Maeve and dove aside. The rotten door exploded inward from a blast of wind. Ellie launched herself into the air and disappeared into the dust cloud. She could fly? I didn't even have time to process that before screams erupted from inside. One man came flying out the door with all 4 limbs broken, writhing in the mud. Ellie walked out spotless. Done, she said. Less than 5 seconds. She'd gone in and come out before I could blink. I looked inside. Several large men were scattered across the floor with various injuries. The unluckiest one had his hand sliced off, fingers lying around him like carrot slices. I stepped over them and said something comforting about the pain being normal. Ellie pointed me to the back room. I pushed the door open and found Mira tied up in the corner, mouth stuffed with rags, body trembling. The moment she saw me, her eyes lit up and tears poured down her face. I pulled the cloth from her mouth and cut the ropes. She was sobbing uncontrollably. There was a red handprint on her little cheek. Someone had slapped her hard. She was terrified. I carried Mira in one arm and dragged one of the men with the other, heading back toward the tavern. We drew quite a crowd. Some soldiers stopped us, but let us pass after I explained the situation. Maeve was having the time of her life, leading the other guys on a rope like animals. I'd pieced together what happened. Evelyn had been busy in the kitchen, and Mira seized the chance to sneak outside. 4 men grabbed her and stuffed her in a sack. I held Mira close and told her the bad guys were already dealt with thanks to Ellie, and that she should apologize to her mom when we got back. She was still shaking, barely whispering responses. I told her the world was full of dangerous people who loved snatching cute little girls like her, and that she might never have seen her mother again if we'd been any later. That made her cry again. I asked Ellie to wake up the unconscious one with water magic. She drenched him, but he didn't budge. I suggested a kick between the legs would do the trick. Maeve volunteered immediately. Ellie said it was her order to follow. Maeve proposed they each take one kick. I let them go ahead. The screaming that followed echoed through the entire street. Bystanders winced. Even I felt it was a bit much. Maeve stood there proudly and announced that men were funny. One kick to the crotch, and they screamed every time. Then she looked at mine. I told her she'd be dead if she tried anything. She said she just wanted to see what it looked like and asked to watch during bath time. I told her to get lost. I tried questioning the men about why they'd kidnapped Mira, but the one I'd been dragging passed out from the pain. The other 3 wouldn't talk. We got back to the tavern. Evelyn wasn't there yet, so I had Ellie break the lock, and we brought everyone inside. Mira clung to my leg and refused to let go. I sat down and put her on my lap, then asked the men again who sent them and why. Nobody spoke. I closed all the doors and windows and told Mira to cover her eyes and ears. Then I announced that Ellie and Maeve would be performing neutering surgery on anyone who stayed quiet. Maeve asked what that meant. I said kick them as hard as possible between the legs. The men panicked. One still cursed at me, calling me evil. I pointed out that kidnapping a child was worse and told the girls to start with him. Ellie delivered a kick so devastating I could hear something crack. The man dropped and started convulsing. Maeve was bouncing with excitement, calling dibs on the next one. The remaining 2 were shaking. Before I even finished asking again, one of them cracked and said a man named Eric had hired them. He pointed at the guy Ellie had broken all 4 limbs, the one still unconscious from the earlier surgery on the street. I checked his breathing. Still alive, barely. Maeve asked if she could kick someone now, mouth full of bread. Before I could answer, the tavern door burst open. Evelyn stood there, hair messy, dress dirty, shoes caked in mud. I'd never seen her look so frantic. The moment she spotted Mira, she exhaled deeply, then her eyes went cold as she scanned the room. Mira screamed, "Mama," and started crying again. Evelyn snapped at her to get upstairs and wait for her punishment. 2 beastkin waitresses carried the trembling girl away. I pointed at the men and told Evelyn they were the ones who took Mira and that I'd brought them here for her. She walked past me and whispered so quietly I almost missed it, "Thank you." The system chimed in. Evelyn's affection toward me had risen to level 2. I didn't stick around at the tavern that night. Evelyn looked murderous, so I bought some smoked meat from the shop across the street and took the girls home before any blood started flying. Next morning, we went back to the tavern like usual. Maeve was bouncing around begging for a whole smoked chicken for breakfast. I pretended not to hear. She downgraded her request to a bowl of stew. I told her she didn't even let me touch her ears, so why should she get stew? She'd promised yesterday when I bought her the dress, then immediately went back on her word after bath time. Wouldn't let me near a single strand of wolf fur. She whined and clung to my arm, begging for meat. At the counter, I ordered 3 bowls of stew and 3 pieces of bread and handed Evelyn the bag of goblin ears I'd forgotten to turn in yesterday. 8 kills, 2 silver. I pushed 2 more silver coins forward to pay for the food, but she wouldn't take them. She said it was on the house. Her thanks for finding Mira. Maeve's head popped up immediately asking for stewed chicken since it was free. I shoved her face back down. I asked Evelyn about the kidnappers. She said the one named Eric was the man whose hand she'd chopped off 4 years ago for trying to grope her. She said she should have aimed for his neck instead. The real victim in all this was Mira, though. No telling what they'd planned to do with her. I glanced toward the kitchen, but didn't see the little fox anywhere. Evelyn confirmed Mira was upstairs. I was about to leave when Evelyn called me back. She had an odd expression. After a few seconds of hesitation, she buried her face in her account book and tried to look busy while asking if I'd take a job, go upstairs and keep Mira company for the day. The kid wouldn't stop asking for me. 5 silver coins, plus lunch and dinner covered. A paid day off with free meals. Best job I'd ever been offered. Ellie hadn't slept well in days, and even I could use the rest. I asked if bringing both girls along was okay. Evelyn eyed Maeve with some concern, but I promised to keep her in check. After breakfast, we headed upstairs. For small rooms lined a hallway on the 2nd floor. The one near the stairs belonged to 2 beastkin waitresses. Evelyn's slaves, actually, but she clearly treated them well. Their room was clean with fresh flowers on the windowsill. I'd heard stories of owners using their slaves as chamber pots at night. Evelyn was nothing like that. A door at the end of the hall cracked open. Mira peeked out and called my name. Maeve rushed forward to hug her, but Mira slammed the door in her face. She opened it again just enough to whisper that her mom said Maeve wasn't smart and she wasn't allowed to play with her. Maeve protested that she'd been the one to rescue Mira yesterday. I corrected her, that was Ellie. Maeve insisted her nose deserved at least half the credit. She wasn't wrong about that. Mira let us all in and latched onto my leg. She said being alone upstairs was boring and begged me to play. I stared at her cute little fox ears and proposed a game where the loser had to let the winner touch their ears. Maeve elbowed me and muttered that I was shameless. Not even a child's ears were safe from me. Myra's room was small and cute. Carpet on the floor, colorful dolls on the bed, a little bookshelf. I sat on the carpet playing rock, paper, scissors with Mira while Ellie curled up in the corner trying to sleep. Maeve sat nearby coaching Mira and getting it wrong every single time. Mira kept losing, and I kept touching her ears as the penalty. Her face was red with frustration. Maeve kept shouting advice like, throw scissors next. Mira would ignore her and throw rock, and I'd throw paper. After watching for a while, I concluded that neither of them was particularly bright. Maeve begged to play, but I refused. She'd cheat. Last round she lost and bolted before I could touch her ears. For someone so top-heavy, she was impressively fast when running away. I told everyone to rest. I looked over at Ellie, still curled up in the corner. I whispered her name, and she immediately sat up. She hadn't slept at all. Meanwhile, Maeve was already spread-eagled on the carpet, belly exposed, snoring. She'd fallen asleep in under 2 minutes. One girl couldn't sleep no matter what, and the other passed out the moment she lay down. I asked Ellie why she'd seemed fine the day I bought her. She said she'd actually slept that night, but only because she'd been so exhausted she'd basically collapsed. That wasn't sleep, that was passing out. Mira suggested a lullaby since that's what her mom did. Ellie replied flatly that she didn't have a mother. The room went silent. Mira then said I should sing instead. I couldn't sing, but I had another idea. I sat on Myra's bed and had Ellie lie down with her head on my lap. She fidgeted at first and seemed ready to leave. I told her to close her eyes, relax, and just breathe. I gently stroked her ears while she settled in. Mira watched and called me a pervert for always touching ears. I covered her mouth and whispered that Ellie was falling asleep. Mira yawned, climbed onto the bed behind Ellie, wrapped her little arms around Ellie's waist, and fell asleep herself. I sat there against the headboard for a while. Ellie's breathing was steady, ears flat against her head. I whispered her name. No response. She was actually asleep. Normally she'd snap to attention the instant I called her, but this time, nothing. The trick was just stroking her ears. That's simple. Then someone knocked on the door. Ellie's ear twitched, and she woke up instantly. Evelyn came in. I told her to keep quiet since Mira was sleeping. I noticed dried blood on Evelyn's face and hands. She said casually that she'd killed some merchants connected to Myra's kidnapping. Not just Eric, there were others involved. She'd hung their bodies in the public square for everyone to see. I asked if that would cause her trouble. She said no one would dare come after her openly. I believed it. A beastkin woman running a tavern in the busiest part of the city had to be seriously powerful. She stepped over Maeve's sleeping body on the floor, checked on Mira, then turned to me with a proposition. She wanted me to stop being a mercenary and work at the tavern instead. My job would be helping around the place and watching Mira. The kid couldn't sit still, and Evelyn needed someone reliable keeping an eye on her. 10 silver coins a day. Food and housing included. She'd even find me a better place to live nearby. I went quiet for a moment, brain spinning. If I wasn't mistaken, this was basically being kept by a woman. I turned Evelyn down. 10 silver a day with free meals and housing sounded amazing, but I had ambitions. I wasn't going to settle into a comfortable routine when there was a whole world out there full of beast-eared girls to discover. Before she left, I stopped her and asked if she considered us friends. She went quiet, thought about it, then turned the question back on me. I said yes, I thought of her as a friend. She gave me this sly half-smile and said then we were friends. The system confirmed it. Affection level 2, friendship achieved. My total stat boost hit 30%. I clenched my fist and swung it around, testing the difference. Ellie was watching me from the bed. She'd actually fallen asleep earlier while I stroked her ears, but Evelyn's visit woke her. She said the short nap helped. I suggested more rest after lunch, but she insisted she was fine. I wanted to test my boosted strength, so I asked Ellie to squeeze my hand. She gripped lightly at first, then gradually increased pressure. I held my own for a moment, but soon it became painful. When I yelled stop, she let go and said I was a bit stronger than a normal person. Just a bit, with a 30% boost. Meanwhile, she could crush bones with her bare hands, punch through throats with her fingers. Her grip strength was comparable to a tiger or lion's bite force. Completely inhuman. I suddenly worried about future, intimate situations. If she got carried away, things could snap. She seemed to read my mind and assured me she had perfect control over her strength. I asked about the flying I'd seen yesterday. She confirmed it, short-duration flight magic that drained a lot of energy. She demonstrated by floating up and touching the ceiling. I asked if I could learn it. She said yes, but since I had no magical foundation and hadn't started training as a child, it would take a very long time. Mira woke up and overheard us talking about magic. She said her mom was making her learn too, and it was harder than math. She offered to take us to Evelyn's study, which apparently had tons of magic books. I asked Evelyn's permission over lunch. She agreed as long as we didn't mess up the room. Maeve was bouncing around declaring she'd learned an amazing spell to impress everyone. Mira mumbled through a mouthful of stew that magic wasn't that easy. Maeve immediately zeroed in on Myra's bowl, noticing the meat chunks were bigger than what we'd gotten. She tried to sweet-talk a bite out of a 5-year-old. I dragged her away. Mira unlocked the study with a little key ring. Inside, the room smelled faintly of almonds and vanilla. 3 walls were covered floor to ceiling with packed bookshelves, hundreds of books. In this era, books were expensive. Evelyn's wealth went deeper than running a tavern. Mira asked what kind of magic I wanted to learn. Before I could answer, Maeve jumped in asking if there was a spell to make food appear out of thin air. Maeve couldn't read a single word. She sat next to me, scratching her ears in frustration, begging Mira to teach her. I stuffed half a piece of bread in her mouth and told her to go away. Mira pushed her out of the study. No eating allowed inside because crumbs attract mice and bugs. I pulled a book off the shelf and flipped through it. The system translated the text for me, but the dense writing still gave me a headache. I found a fireball spell and asked Mira if I could learn it. She said it was the simplest beginner magic. Someone with good talent could learn it in about a month. She knew it herself, though she admitted she tried to use it on the kidnappers yesterday and got slapped before she could finish the chant. She took me up to the roof to demonstrate. She chanted a long string of strange words while red magic circles formed around her arm, then launched a fist-sized fireball that flew incredibly far until it vanished in the distance. We both stared toward where it landed and silently hoped it didn't set anything on fire. Back in the study, I tried learning the spell myself. The incantation was a mess of random-sounding syllables with no logical connection. I couldn't memorize it no matter how many times I read it. The advanced spells were even worse. One called Fire Meteor Shower had a chant that filled an entire page. You'd get cut to pieces by bandits before finishing something that long. I asked Ellie to teach me her killing magic instead. She said even the simplified version required memorizing a chant first. Then she gave me a rare piece of advice. Don't focus too much on getting the words perfect. What actually mattered was imagining a fireball in my hand. Mira confirmed this was what her mom had taught her too. Imagination was something I excelled at. I started chanting again while picturing a round ball of fire in my palm. Something warm surged through my arm. Deep red magic circles appeared one by one, and a pale yellow fireball formed in my hand. It was hot, painfully so, and I felt a strange urge to unleash it and burn everything around me. Mira panicked and screamed at me not to release it indoors. Before I could react, Ellie threw a water ball and extinguished it. She'd been watching me carefully the entire time, ready to intervene. Reliable as always. Mira was stunned. She hugged me and said it had taken her months to learn that spell, but I'd done it on my first try. Evelyn came upstairs after hearing the commotion and asked what was going on. Mira grabbed my shirt excitedly and told her mom I'd learned magic just by looking at it once. Then she asked, "Mama, when I grow up, can I be with him?" What was supposed to be a rest day left me more tired than usual. The morning was fine, just games with Mira and a nap. But the afternoon was torture. Those magic incantations scrambled my brain. The system mocked me, saying if I didn't suffer through learning magic now, I'd suffer in life later. Sounded exactly like something my parents used to say. I decided to put magic study on hold until I could afford my own spell books. I lay on the bed and noticed Ellie looking at me strangely. She'd been sneaking glances all afternoon, ever since Myra's comment about wanting to be with me when she grew up. I called her over to let me pet her ears. She sat beside me and leaned her head in. Then she said something unexpected that I reminded her of a friend from the island. Someone who also liked touching her head and tail. That friend had given her the name Ellie too. I'd just read it off the system screen without knowing, and it turned out to be the exact same name. Pure coincidence. Ellie's cheeks were flushed from the ear stroking. She said her friend had also panicked during her first magic lesson and accidentally set a house on fire, which was why Ellie had been ready with a water ball this afternoon. She'd seen it coming. I asked the friend's name. Ellie went quiet. Her ears went limp like the question drained all the energy out of her. After a long pause, she said the name was Amy, then got up and said she was going to sleep. I patted the bed and suggested she sleep next to me so she could tell me more about Amy. Maeve yelled, "Pervert," from behind the bath curtain. I told her to mind her own business. She claimed she was talking about someone else, as if there were anyone else in the room. I raised my hand to activate her brand, and she instantly dropped to her knees apologizing. I tried convincing Ellie to share the bed, just sleeping, nothing else. She refused and stayed on the floor. I let it go. She could literally snap me in half if she wanted. Maeve came out from her bath wearing the new brown dress. Her figure filled it out completely. The dress itself was plain, but she made it look good. I told her that honestly. She didn't believe me. Nobody had ever called her pretty before. I said she looked a bit dumb at first glance, but the more I looked, the prettier she got. She slapped my arm lightly and asked where she was dumb. I pushed my luck and asked to touch her ears since she was in a good mood. Her ears drooped immediately. She realized the compliments had an ulterior motive. I swore I meant every word. She paced around nervously, then finally sat down beside me and lowered her head. She told me to be gentle. Her face was already red before I even started. Then I had a better idea. I told her sitting side by side was uncomfortable and suggested she sit on my lap instead so I could reach her ears more easily. Next morning, I headed out with both girls as usual. Ellie had another bad night and looked exhausted. Maeve was giving me the silent treatment because I'd accidentally touched her, but while petting her ears last night. She didn't speak to me the whole walk until we reached the tavern, when she immediately grabbed my arm and begged for stewed chicken. Typical. I had about 15 silver left. I ordered 3 bowls of stew and bread for breakfast, planning to save the bigger meal for dinner. Evelyn came over and offered me another paid day watching Mira. Maeve nearly exploded with excitement. But I couldn't keep living on handouts. I needed real money. I wanted to rent a bigger place since 3 people in that tiny shack was already cramped, and I planned to buy more slaves eventually. Evelyn had something bigger. Mercenaries had found a cave leading underground north of the city, full of goblins. The local viscount and the merchant guild were recruiting a team to go down and clear out the nest. Pay was 40 silver per day. Over 50 people were going, including the viscount's son. Scouts had checked the route and said it wasn't too dangerous. 40 silver a day would solve my money problems fast. A few days down there, and I could afford a decent house near the square. I told Evelyn to count me in. She had the tavern staff prepare supplies, black bread, salted meat, and water skins. Enough for 3 people for 3 days if we rationed carefully. She said she'd deduct the cost from my pay. She walked me to the gathering point outside the square. A crowd of mercenaries in various armor stood around, some harassing women passing by. The lead soldiers wore polished plate armor. I noticed plenty of male beastkin slaves in the group too, all wearing worn-out gear. Evelyn went ahead and spoke to a nobleman in plate armor, pointed at me, and came back saying I was registered. Before leaving, she lingered like she wanted to say something else. I stared at her fox ears and told her I wanted to touch them. She glared at me and told me to listen to myself. Then she said to be careful down there. If I didn't come back, Mira would be upset. I asked if it would only be Mira who'd be upset. She said of course, fixed my collar, and walked away without looking back. Maeve bumped my shoulder and muttered that I was a pervert for wanting to touch everyone's ears. I handed her all the supplies to carry since she couldn't fight anyway. She accepted with a suspicious grin. Being in charge of the food was her dream job. I warned her that if I caught her sneaking bites, she was dead. She swore on her life she'd never steal food, then immediately swallowed her saliva. Just then, a man's voice came from behind us asking why there were female slaves here. Apparently women weren't usually brought underground. I turned around and saw the nobleman Evelyn had just been talking to. The young nobleman looked my age but wore expensive plate armor head to toe, with 2 attendants carrying maces behind him. I pointed at Ellie and told him she was from White Mist Island. He raised an eyebrow. How could a mercenary afford that? Then he looked at Maeve and frowned. I said she was just carrying our supplies and wouldn't fight. He ordered me to send her back, saying women were a burden underground and any monster would scare them senseless. His tone left no room for argument. I was about to tell him to forget the whole job when Evelyn appeared out of nowhere. She told him I was her friend and asked him to look after me. His expression softened. He gave me one last look and walked away with his attendants. I asked Evelyn where she'd come from. She ignored the question and pulled me aside, telling me to just go along with whatever nobles said. I told her I couldn't deal with arrogant people like that. She said nobles were all like this and asked if I'd never seen one before. Honestly, I hadn't. Where I came from, people who acted like that ended up in prison. She explained that his name was Vitter, son of Viscount Pavel, the future Lord of Calydorn. He seemed harsh, but was actually a decent person underneath. She lowered her voice and said that for her, calling someone a good person was high praise, and he barely qualified. Good enough for me. An uptight, but mostly honest knight. She patted my shoulder, told me not to cause trouble, and left. I noticed something while waiting. Every other mercenary wore armor. Chainmail, leather, padded at minimum. Only slaves wore thin linen shirts. We looked like tourists. I told Ellie we'd get proper equipment after this job. She said she'd used light leather armor on the island. Plate and chainmail were too heavy and killed her agility. She pointed out a dark-skinned muscular beastkin standing near Vitter, carrying a heavy hammer and wearing full plate. He had the same dead eyes as Ellie. Another White Mist Island product. Maeve asked if I wanted to touch his ears too. I told her I wasn't interested in men's ears. I liked mature, curvy women, not bearded muscle guys. Around noon, the group finally started moving toward the north gate. As we passed the square, I spotted Evelyn standing outside the tavern watching us. The moment our eyes met, she turned and went inside. Maeve nudged me and said the tavern lady definitely had feelings for me. She'd been sneaking looks at me during breakfast, resting her chin on her hand and glancing up. I smiled and said maybe she just couldn't resist how handsome I was. Maeve pouted and muttered that Evelyn was old. I told her 26 wasn't old. If Evelyn were wine, she'd be freshly poured and perfectly aerated. Maeve grumbled that she was a little jealous. I perked up, thinking she meant jealous of Evelyn's relationship with me. She clarified. She was jealous of anyone who owned a whole tavern and never had to worry about food. Completely different wavelength. I glanced at Ellie instead. She was already looking at me. Vitter rode at the front on horseback, while I kept to the back of the group with my girls. It was scorching hot, and my shirt was soaked before we even left the city. Ellie kept glancing at me and looking away. I asked if she wanted water. She shook her head and perked her ears up instead. I grinned. She wanted me to pet her ears. She couldn't bring herself to say it out loud and turned away. Maeve dramatically announced that Ellie had fallen. Her voice was loud enough that mercenaries ahead turned to stare, and even Vito looked back. I told Maeve to keep it down, then placed my hand on Ellie's ears and started rubbing. I asked if she wanted her tail touched too. She shook her head firmly. Ears yes, tail no. Maeve watched and asked if ear touching really felt that good. I reminded her she'd enjoyed it plenty last night. She denied everything, but I remembered her practically melting until I accidentally grazed her butt. About 2 kilometers out, Vitter dismounted and led us into thick brush. The undergrowth was full of snakes. One mercenary got bitten on the rear and had to be given antidote by a priest. I put Maeve on point to clear the path. She complained through tears that I was cruel. Ellie stepped in and offered to take the lead since she could hear snakes, and their venom barely affected her. Maeve nearly cried with gratitude and handed over the scabbard she'd been using to swat grass. The group stopped. Word passed back that we'd arrived and scouts were checking ahead. After a wait, we got the order to enter. The tunnel was much wider than the one we'd sealed before, room for 3 people side by side. with smooth walls like something mechanical had bored through. Ellie took one look and said it was dug by a burrowing demon worm. I asked what that was. She said they were massive underground creatures, commonly tamed by dark elves for tunneling and hard to fight. I told the attendant at the entrance, but he dismissed it. Scouts said there were only goblins down there. I had a bad feeling. I asked Ellie if she could beat one of those worms. She said no, but she could protect the three of us. That was enough. We descended. Ellie lit a flame in her palm. The tunnel spiraled down, the air growing damper until I heard flowing water. It opened into a vast underground cavern with a slow river running through it. Glowing blue mushrooms dotted the darkness. Bats shrieked overhead and fled deeper into the cave. Maeve grabbed my arm and pressed against me, trembling. Some mercenaries looked just as scared, shrinking into themselves. Vitter lifted his visor and shouted that the goblin camp was just ahead and nobody was allowed to retreat during the fight. I watched him making all that noise in the dark and shook my head. Something felt wrong. Maeve asked what was wrong. I told her I wasn't sure, just a bad feeling, and I hoped I was overthinking it. We pushed deeper, and I spotted our first goblin corpse, a sentry with its throat slit by the scouts. We were getting close. I handed Maeve my dagger for self-defense. She nodded nervously, weighed down by all the supplies on her back. A scout came back and told everyone to put out their torches. We had to grab onto each other and move in the dark. Ellie took my hand. I grabbed Maeve, and we shuffled forward blind. I could hear mercenaries ahead tripping and crashing into rocks. I asked Ellie if she could see. She said yes. Even the faint glow from mushrooms over 100 meters away was enough for her cat eyes. She was basically a living night vision device. Maeve whimpered behind me, begging me to slow down. Ellie told her she'd warn her about any rocks ahead. Eventually, a faint light appeared along with a horrible smell. Maeve nearly gagged. The source was dozens of rotting corpses stripped naked and crawling with maggots, the goblins' food supply. I almost threw up myself. Ellie didn't even flinch. Mercenaries muttered about all the people who'd gone missing recently. This was where they'd ended up. Ahead, I could see a ruined stone structure with torches, goblins patrolling around it. Vitter crouched low, but his armor still clanked. He whispered to his beastkin slave, who stood up and slammed his hammer into the ground. The whole cavern shook, and the shockwave knocked goblins off their feet. That was the signal. Vitter charged in with his sword, followed by all 50 mercenaries. Goblins poured out of the camp to meet them. It was a one-sided slaughter. Vitter was impressive. Every swing of his knight's sword sent out a wave of fire. His beastkin slave was even more devastating, smashing groups of goblins into paste with his hammer and launching stone spikes that shattered pillars. Honestly, that male slave looked stronger than Ellie in raw power. We were stuck at the back, picking off goblins trying to flank the group. I got into the fight myself, cutting off heads and kicking them away. The system's stat boost was real. I was noticeably faster and more agile than before. I was actually having fun when Ellie stepped in front of me and said she'd take over because I was getting blood all over my clothes. I looked at her beautiful face and couldn't help smiling. Female slaves were definitely better. At least they were nice to look at. I told her she was pretty. She didn't respond, just flicked her wrist and sent several goblin heads flying. Then I realized Maeve was gone. I found her hiding in a dark corner. She said she'd only get in the way during combat, so she figured she'd hide. Fair enough. The battle was basically over. Goblin corpses piled into a small mountain, survivors scattering in all directions. Vitter and his attendants were celebrating. I told Maeve she could come out and scavenge. She ran over excitedly, but the goblins had nothing valuable. She picked up a few clubs anyway. Vitter announced there were more camps to clear and told everyone to stop picking through junk. I looked at Maeve loaded down with supplies and goblin weapons and told her to drop the clubs. No point carrying useless weight. She paused, tossed them aside, and mumbled with a little smile that she didn't know I actually cared about her. We cleared 3 goblin camps under Vitter's lead. I barely had to fight, but just walking through the underground tunnels drained my energy. Ellie was fine. Her body could handle it easily. Maeve was a different story. Loaded down with all our supplies, she was dragging her feet and whining that she was dying. I sighed and took the 3 heavy water skins off her back. She instantly bounced back to life, skipping away with a smug grin. I'd been tricked. I called her out on it. She clearly wasn't that tired. She sheepishly took 1 water skin back and begged me to let her off the hook for the rest. I let it go. Vitter called a halt to rest. His plate armor weighed at least 30 pounds, and he was exhausted after 3 fights. His attendants helped him take it off. I found a spot against the cave wall and sat down. No way to tell the time underground. I could only guess it was afternoon based on how hungry I was. The salted meat Evelyn packed was brutally salty, like they'd used a whole bag of salt. 2 bites, and I was reaching for water. Maeve treated it like candy, shoving piece after piece into her mouth without flinching. I told her to slow down since our water was limited. She froze mid-chew and asked why we'd brought water at all when Ellie could create it with magic. Also, there was a river right there. I joked that the water was just to torture her. She started fake crying and swatting me. A nearby mercenary overheard and snapped at her. Magic water evaporates after a while, and drinking too much could kill you, and the goblins might have poisoned the river upstream. Maeve went quiet and hid behind me. Then that same mercenary looked Maeve and Ellie up and down and asked how much it'd cost to sleep with one of them. I noticed other men eyeing my girls too. They were the only 2 women among 50-plus fighters. Ellie didn't care. Maeve was terrified, whispering behind me, begging me not to sell her. I told him flatly they were for my personal use only and weren't for sale. He clicked his tongue and walked away. Maeve pressed against my back, asking why human men were like this. Thinking about women even in a dangerous place like this. I told her to keep quiet and stop drawing attention. I told Ellie that if anyone tried anything, she should break their fingers. She agreed casually. During the rest, I studied Vidur's beastkin slave, a massive guy in plate armor with a warhammer. I quietly asked Ellie who'd win if they fought. She said in a sparring match she'd lose because she couldn't overpower him, but in a real fight to the death, she'd win. I was skeptical. She doubled down. Even 2 of him wouldn't beat her. She said it so matter-of-factly that I believed her despite my doubts. I jokingly asked Maeve the same question. She poked her head out from behind me and said the guy could kill her just by sitting on her. At least she was self-aware. Then a scream cut through the cave. A mercenary had pinned his own beastkin slave to the ground. The slave begged for mercy, but got a blade through the heart. The mercenary explained calmly that goblins had smashed the slave's knee. He couldn't walk, and a cripple wasn't worth dragging out. He stripped the body naked and left it there. Ellie didn't react at all. Maeve stared at the scene, ears drooping, then crawled behind me and whispered, "Master, if I get hurt down here, please don't kill me. Just let me die on my own." I joked with Maeve that if she got hurt, I'd grab the food and run without looking back. She headbutted my spine in protest. I told Ellie to sleep first while I kept watch. She said she could go days without rest. I told her that wasn't happening. She was our main fighter, and if she collapsed, we'd starve. I patted my lap and told her to put her head down. She twitched her ears and leaned onto my thigh. I started stroking her ears. I offered my other leg to Maeve. She refused. Her new dress was already getting dirty from being my backrest. She also whispered that the mercenaries had been staring at her with creepy eyes, and she didn't want to be vulnerable out in the open. She muttered that she hoped a big worm would come eat them all. After a while, Ellie actually fell into a deep sleep. I could hear soft snoring, the first time ever. She was always so tense that any tiny noise woke her, but this time she was truly out. She mumbled, "Amy," in her sleep. I wondered what that friend of hers had been like. I got drowsy and started browsing the system encyclopedia. Everyone's affection was stuck at level 2. I was daydreaming about what level 3 might unlock when I heard a thud. "Goblins incoming," someone shouted. Arrows and rocks rained into camp. A group of armored goblins charged in. Ellie snapped awake instantly, launching off my lap. A quick burst of wind magic, and the goblins near us lost their heads. I yanked Maeve to her feet. The camp was chaos, people dropping everywhere. Vidur started rallying the troops to break through. His slave source raised a stone wall and slammed his hammer down, blasting goblins aside. I moved to follow the group, but Ellie grabbed my waistband with one hand, Maeve with the other, and sprinted the opposite direction. She blew open a gap through the goblins with wind magic. I didn't understand why until I heard the ground rumble. A massive black creature burst from the earth right in the middle of the formation. It swallowed over a dozen mercenaries in one bite. The burrowing demon worm, exactly what Ellie had warned about. Ellie flew through the darkness carrying both of us until the sounds of fighting faded. She was breathing hard when she finally set us down and guided us into a narrow cave. Maeve delivered bad news. 2 of our 3 water skins had fallen during the escape. Ellie said we could survive on magic water for 2 or 3 extra days. I asked about the food. Maeve said she'd tied everything to her body, all still there. At least that was something. My legs were shaking. That worm had erupted right where I'd been standing moments earlier. If Ellie hadn't heard it coming, I'd be inside that thing's stomach right now. I asked what it was. Ellie confirmed, a burrowing demon worm. She'd heard that tunneling sound countless times underground and recognized it instantly. Goblins could apparently tame them. Maeve mumbled that she'd literally just wished a worm would eat those mercenaries, and it actually happened. Her mouth was cursed. Ellie lit a flame and told us to check for injuries. Maeve let out a cry. I rushed over, worried she was hurt. She was fine, but Ellie had ripped her new dress during the escape. Her first new outfit ever, torn. She started crying. I told her we'd buy another one and asked Ellie how she was holding up. She said she was fine and this was nothing for her. I looked out into the pitch-black cave. Our group was scattered. We'd lost most of our water, and we were stuck deep underground. The plan was simple: find a way back to the surface. Down here, Ellie couldn't fight freely while protecting both of us. After Ellie rested a bit, we left the cave and started searching for an exit. The mercenaries always said the underground was full of danger and treasure, but all I found was danger. Skeletons and ghouls came at us in waves. None had appeared when we were with the group, but now that we were alone, they were everywhere. I could handle the skeletons, but the faster ghouls needed Ellie. Maeve asked if killing these monsters paid anything. I told her only if someone had posted a bounty. She suggested we collect the loot now and use it to fake a completed job later. Clever idea, but it wouldn't work. Skeleton magic crystals lost their color after a day or two. Someone had already tried that trick on Evelyn and got caught immediately. Maeve grinned proudly at having the same idea as that guy. I shook my head. She and the word, clever, didn't belong in the same sentence. We were running low on water. Only about a liter left. Maeve kept begging for drinks after eating all that salty meat. I asked Ellie if this path could lead us out. She said we'd have to rely on luck. If we were fortunate, we'd find a goblin tunnel to the surface. Luck, that was Maeve's specialty. I poked her side and told her to walk in front and lead the way. She looked at me like I'd sentenced her to death. I explained she was leading, not scouting. Ellie and I would be right behind her. She cried her way to the front, stumbling through the dark. But the moment she took the lead, every undead monster vanished. Not a single skeleton in sight. Her S-rank luck was no joke. Eventually, we were all exhausted. I found a spot behind a large boulder to rest. It was cramped. Maeve complained she couldn't stretch her legs. I told Ellie to sleep first. She shook her head and pointed at her own lap, offering it to me instead. A lap pillow. I didn't hesitate. Her thighs were firm and springy, not soft, and smelled faintly nice. The system chimed in saying my loyalty to Ellie had reached 100%. My loyalty to her. The system had flipped things around. Maeve asked jealously if she could use Ellie's other leg. Ellie refused instantly. Maeve pouted and said she'd definitely share if the situation were reversed. Ellie said she wouldn't want it anyway. I told Maeve to rest and stop fidgeting. She wouldn't sit still, squirming around constantly. Then dirt started flying. Ellie lit a flame, and we saw Maeve digging at the ground like a dog, tongue out, mud everywhere. I yelled at her to stop. She said something was buried under her, and she had to dig it out. She yanked up an old rotting sack that fell apart in her hands. She kept digging and pulled out a big clump of dirt, setting it in front of me. I saw a round shape in the mud. I picked at it and pulled out a blackened silver coin, corroded but still showing the world tree symbol of the kingdom. I told Ellie to wash away the dirt with water. Under the mud was a pile of gold and silver coins. I turned to look at Maeve. She was sitting there with her head held high, tail wagging, waiting to be praised. I rubbed Maeve's head like a dog and called her a good girl. She squirmed away embarrassed. Then I grabbed her face and kissed her cheek without thinking. She screamed, shoved me off, and hid behind Ellie. I didn't care. All I could see was money. I counted it carefully, 34 gold coins and over 100 silver. Besides the 50 gold the system gave me at the start, I'd never seen this much money in my life. The clinking of the coins was deeply satisfying. With this, I could rent a place near the square, buy proper equipment, maybe even get more slaves. I looked back at Maeve. Her face was completely red. She peeked out from behind, Ellie showing only her fluffy ears. I told her it was just a kiss on the cheek and asked her to keep digging. She said she had a feeling there was nothing else down there. 34 gold converted to over 1,000 silver, enough to buy 50 Maeves. Many people in this world couldn't earn that in a lifetime. Now I understood why mercenaries risked their lives to come underground. The treasure was real, but finding it depended entirely on luck. I'd stepped right over that spot without noticing. Maeve sat on it, felt something poking her butt, and dug up a fortune. Luck really was the most overpowered talent. I fell asleep on Ellie's lap, holding the money bag. When I woke up, Maeve was chewing bread and the coins were still there. Ellie said I'd slept a long time. She'd napped too after Maeve woke up, though she still looked tired. Maeve wouldn't look at me, still embarrassed about the kiss. I put Maeve on point again. She cried and protested, but I explained her luck kept the monsters away, which was true. Her father had told her she was cursed by a witch and brought bad luck to everyone around her. I told her that was nonsense. I promised a secret reward when we got out. She stopped crying and asked what it was. I said it wouldn't be a secret if I told her now. She went to the front. Sure enough, with Maeve leading, no monsters appeared. But I noticed we were going deeper. The glowing mushrooms were getting denser. At one fork, she went left and down instead of right and up. I almost corrected her, then decided to trust her instincts. Ellie suddenly grabbed my arm. Her cat ears were spinning like radar dishes. She heard weapons clashing ahead. Maeve sniffed the air and confirmed. Lots of goblins, plus a burning smell. I asked why she hadn't smelled them earlier. She said her nose was an active skill. She had to deliberately sniff to detect things. I suggested turning back. Ellie agreed and started walking. But Maeve stayed put, still sniffing around. She asked if we could go take a look. If there were too many goblins, we could always run. Ever since she'd found that gold, I'd become deeply superstitious about Maeve's instincts. I asked Ellie how her magic reserves were. She said she'd recovered about half. Good enough. I smiled and said we'd follow Maeve's gut. Maybe there'd be another surprise waiting for us. We crept forward and I finally saw it. 40 or 50 goblins gathered around something, cheering. Behind them, a massive black worm was writhing on the ground. The burrowing demon worm. It looked like a giant grub, as wide as the tunnel we'd entered through, maybe 20 or 30 meters long. The goblins were feeding it their own dead, tossing corpses into its mouth full of grinding teeth. The sound of bones being crushed made my skin crawl. Maeve grabbed my shirt and begged to leave. Ellie peered out and said it was the nobleman, Vitter. The goblins had captured him and were making him fight them one at a time, either to torture him or to pick their next chief. I could faintly hear him screaming at them to bring it on. Ellie confirmed no other mercenaries were anywhere nearby. The ambush must have wiped out most of the group. More goblins with torches were approaching from other tunnels. I thought it over. 50 or 60 goblins was nothing for Ellie. She'd slaughtered more than 20 in seconds the day I bought her. I asked if she could save Vitter. She studied the goblins' positions for a few seconds, then said yes. But we'd need to run immediately after because the worm's hide was too thick for her to cut with her current magic reserves. Her plan was simple. Walk in, grab Vitter, throw him to me, hold off the goblins, then catch up later. I was worried about losing her over some nobleman, but she shook her head. It wasn't dangerous. I was underestimating her. She pulled the sword from my waist and strolled toward the goblins casually. Maeve couldn't believe she was just walking out in the open. Neither could I. Goblins spotted her and charged with their clubs. Before they could swing, their heads were already flying. Her sword was so fast I could barely follow it. She cut through to Vitter. The worm moved. The whole cavern shook as it lunged at her. She dodged by stepping on its head and jumped behind it. Then Vitter came spinning through the air toward us in the most bizarre flying position I'd ever seen. Maeve bolted. I stood frozen. Ellie used wind magic from a distance to slow him down just before impact. I rushed forward to catch him. We collided and tumbled across the ground. My chest exploded with pain, felt like broken ribs. Vitter was a mess. Covered in blood, clothes shredded, no sword, one leg broken. I asked if he could run. He couldn't. I hauled him onto my back and sprinted after Maeve. I ran until I collapsed and dropped Vitter. He complained about the rough handling. I told him to be quiet and watch for Ellie. Minutes passed. Maeve muttered that maybe the goblins ate her. I slapped my hand over her cursed mouth. Then footsteps. Ellie came flying back holding the bloody sword. She was drained of magic, but unhurt. Vitter groaned on the ground, demanding I help him up. He started talking to me like a lord. I reminded him I'd just saved his life. He paused, dropped the attitude, and answered my questions. About half the group had escaped to the surface. I asked how. He laughed bitterly. They'd escaped because he'd stayed behind to cover their retreat. That's how the goblins caught him. Vitter hobbled behind us, complaining nonstop about wanting help walking. I let him lean on my shoulder. He immediately started insulting me, calling me a rude commoner, saying Evelyn had terrible taste in mercenaries, and that I should be honored to serve him. I dropped him on the ground and started walking away. He panicked and yelled for me to come back. I returned and told him to shut up if he wanted my help. He finally went quiet. We found a spot to rest. I gave him half a piece of black bread. He mocked me for not having noble food. I told him it was all we had. He ate it in seconds and demanded another. I warned him we had limited supplies. He called me cheap and promised to repay 10 times over. I gave him one more piece. Then he asked if I was Evelyn's lover. My heart skipped a beat for a second, but I said no, just friends. He said he'd never seen Evelyn speak so well of any man before. I quickly upgraded my answer to close friends. He looked at Ellie and offered double whatever I'd paid to buy her. I told him she was my wife. He was stunned. A slave as a wife? He asked if I was cursed. Then he looked at Maeve. I put my arm on her shoulder and said she was also my wife. Maeve choked on her bread and spit crumbs everywhere, yelling that I was lying. Vitter couldn't understand me. He'd heard of nobles using beastkin slaves for pleasure, but marriage was unheard of. I pointed at Maeve's fluffy ears and tail and said just looking at them put me in a good mood. He asked increasingly ridiculous questions. Would I be interested in male beastkin? What about monkeys? I told him monkeys and beastkin were completely different and described what monkeys looked like. He was surprised I'd ever seen one, since in this era they were rare exotic pets only the wealthy owned. He guessed I was a foreign nobleman based on my appearance and attitude. I said I was just an ordinary person. After resting, we continued searching. Vita limped behind us muttering about how many people died down there. He said these underground cleanings happened about once a year to keep the monsters from threatening trade routes and villages. Then Maeve found a narrow passage in the rock wall with rubble piled beside it. She sniffed around and crawled in on all fours, climbing upward. I grabbed her ankle and asked if she was sure it was safe. She said she'd check and call us if it worked. Moments later, she shouted down, "I can see stars." Vitter couldn't believe it. He'd expected us to wander underground for days. I pushed Ellie in first, then crawled in after her. We were getting out. We climbed out just before dawn. The city was only 2 or 3 kilometers away. I hauled Vitter onto my back since his leg was broken and he wouldn't stop screaming about it. By the time we reached the gate, soldiers spotted him and rushed over to carry him away. He was still yelling about his leg as they took him. A soldier tossed me a bag of coins, Vitter's reward. About 40 silver. Not bad for almost dying. Maeve asked what was next. I told her we'd hit the slave market first, then the tavern for food, and I'd ask Evelyn about renting a bigger place near the square. Maeve whispered to Ellie that it looked like they were getting a new sister. We headed straight to the slave market, but a trader immediately shooed us away, thinking we were beggars. I looked down at myself, covered head to toe in mud and dirt. Maeve looked like a lump of coal. Only Ellie had managed to keep her face clean despite the blood and filth on her clothes. Then the familiar slave trader spotted us and recognized me. He got excited. A fresh batch from White Mist Island had arrived just yesterday, and he'd set aside one he knew I'd like. He started shouting across the street about how he'd saved me a big-chested one. People stared. I told him to just show me. Inside the old building, my eyes locked onto her immediately. A snake tribe beastkin, tall, elegant figure, shirt collar hanging open showing an incredible view. She had a high ponytail, amber eyes, lips the color of raspberries, and sharp, aggressive features. If Ellie was the cold beauty type, this one was the dangerous seductress. I appraised her. 18 years old, snake beastkin. B strength, C endurance, A agility and intelligence, S perception. Overall quality, epic, between Maeve's rare and Ellie's legendary. No name, no loyalty. I asked the price. The trader wanted 40 gold. I offered 30 silver. He nearly had a stroke. I quickly corrected to 30 gold, the most I could afford while still having money for rent and equipment. He said no. I pushed to 35 gold, owing him the last 5 until next time. I pressured him about being a repeat customer, buying 3 slaves already, and promised more business. He caved. After branding her, I walked out of the market with my new snake girl. Maeve muttered behind me that I was a shameless pervert who only bought female slaves with big chests. She wasn't entirely wrong. Maeve wouldn't stop complaining about my taste in women. I told her men naturally liked curves. It was biology. She called me a pervert. I said I wasn't interested in her specifically, and her face fell. She muttered that not being on my radar was a good thing. Sure it was. I checked on the snake girl behind us. She was still following obediently, unlike a certain wolf who'd bolted into an alley the moment I looked away on her first day. Then the system chimed in. Snake Girl's loyalty was at 95%. Right out of the gate. I couldn't believe it. When I'd bought Ellie, her loyalty was 0. I quickly checked Ellie's current loyalty, 50% after all this time together. That cat had serious rebel energy. We reached the tavern. The moment I pushed the door open, Evelyn looked up from behind the counter and her eyes went wide. She rushed over, ignoring the other customers. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept. I walked past her and sat in my usual corner. I ordered 4 bowls of stew and 4 stewed chickens. Time to celebrate being alive. Ellie and Maeve sat across from me. The snake girl stood like a statue until I specifically told her to sit. She only followed my commands, ignoring Maeve completely. Evelyn came over after ordering the food. She'd heard from mercenaries who escaped that a worm had attacked, and the expedition was scattered with heavy casualties. I confirmed it and credited Ellie's quick thinking for getting us out. Evelyn asked if I was hurt. I said just some dirt from crawling through tunnels. I asked if she'd been worried. Her eyes flickered and she retreated behind the counter, claiming she only cared about the 20 silver I still owed her in rent. I grinned and pressed her, not even a tiny bit worried. She pushed me away and told me to stop getting mud on her. Maeve eavesdropped with her ears perked up. She looked like something was on her mind. I turned to the snake girl and introduced everyone. Ellie, Maeve the idiot, Maeve protested loudly, and myself as her new master. I asked her name. She said she didn't have one. Then she glanced at Ellie. I asked if they knew each other. She confirmed they'd been on the island together. Interesting. I'd have to ask her about Ellie's past sometime. I tried to come up with a name. I was terrible at naming things. I suggested Medusa. Maeve jumped in and proposed Lilith or Sylvanas instead. I gave the snake girl all 3 options and told her to pick whichever she actually liked, not whichever she thought I wanted. She chose Lilith. After Ellie and Maeve went to wash their hands, I asked Lilith what her specialties were. She showed me 2 sharp fangs and a forked tongue and said she was skilled at assassination, ambush, and she looked right at me, seducing men. I cleared my throat and asked very seriously if she could demonstrate that last one when she had time. For research purposes, of course. After breakfast, I asked Evelyn to help me find a new place. She had connections everywhere and found something within minutes, a 2-story house near the square. It looked a bit old from outside with vines on the walls and some cracked wood framing, but inside it was clean and well-furnished. 6 rooms plus a kitchen and bathroom, only a few hundred meters from the tavern. Rent was 7 gold for half a year. That would leave me with just over 40 silver. Back to being nearly broke. So much for taking a few days off. Evelyn said it was the cheapest option in the area, and it came with 5 beds and all the furniture. I asked Ellie and Lilith if they liked it. They both stared at me blankly until I told them to nod if they approved. Ellie nodded first, then Lilith copied her after checking Ellie's reaction. Evelyn shook her head at this display. Maeve was jumping around screaming that she wanted the biggest room. I told her she'd be sleeping in the downstairs living room. Her smile froze, and she looked devastated. I let her suffer for a minute before telling her I was joking. She'd get a real room upstairs. I paid Evelyn 4 gold coins plus a bag of silver to cover the rest. She pocketed it and left. We went back to the slum house to move. Turns out I owned almost nothing. The bed, chest, and cookware all belonged to Evelyn. My only real possessions were the giant bathtub and the dresses I'd bought. I told Ellie to borrow all of Evelyn's pots and pans from the house. I'd return them eventually. Maeve muttered that it was a sneaky excuse to keep seeing Evelyn. She wasn't wrong. We stopped at the market for 4 clean bed sheets since the new beds were just bare wooden frames. By afternoon, everything was done. I stood in the new living room and assigned rooms. I'd take the one farthest down the upstairs hallway. Ellie and Lilith would get the 2 rooms nearest the stairs. For Maeve, I said she'd sleep downstairs to guard the door, like a watchdog. She protested, why her and not the others? I said she was our guard dog. She pointed out that Ellie's hearing was way better and that putting her near the kitchen was asking for midnight snacking. She had a point. I pretended to threaten her, then gave in. All 4 of us would sleep upstairs, 1 room each. Ellie and I at the far end, Maeve and Lilith near the stairs. She lit up and tackled my arm, bouncing with joy. Ellie and Lilith stood silently holding their bed sheets. I told them to stop standing around like statues and go make their beds. Ellie headed upstairs immediately. Lilith followed right behind her like a shadow. That night, I bought some smoked meat and cooked porridge for everyone. After dinner, I took a long hot bath, told the girls to wash up and rest, then headed upstairs. My room felt empty and quiet. I actually missed Maeve's noise. To kill time, I practiced the fireball spell I'd learned from Myra's books. I was getting faster, about 2 seconds to form one in my palm. The system mocked me, saying I should forget magic and just buy more slaves to boost my stats. I I reminded it that it was the one who told me to study magic in the first place. It admitted it had been lying. I cursed it out and went back to practicing anyway. I checked the encyclopedia and noticed Lilith's bonus hadn't registered yet. I probably needed to talk to her first. Then Maeve barged in without knocking, hair still wet, wearing her old patched clothes. I told her to knock next time. She said okay and got straight to the point. She wanted me to pet her ears. Voluntarily. She sat down and lowered her head, warning me to be gentle and not stick fingers inside her ears like last time. I was shocked and joked that maybe it was beastkin mating season. Her face turned red, and she jumped up ready to leave. I pulled her back down and stroked her ears a few times, but they were soaking wet and not pleasant to touch. I told her to dry off first. She rubbed her hair with a towel and said something unexpected. I was the best person she'd ever known. Her family never let her eat until she was full, never bought her new clothes, and made her sleep by the front door. She said she was sticking with me. I asked if she was getting emotional on me. She didn't understand the reference. Then she grabbed her ears, wiggled them, and promised to let me touch them every day from now on. The system confirmed, affection level 3, close friends. Her stat contribution alone jumped to 20%, bringing my total to 40. I asked if she had feelings for me. She froze, face bright red, and stammered that she just thought of me as a good friend. I corrected her. I was her master. She said fine, a good master then. I asked if I could touch something other than her ears. She went completely stiff, bit her lip, and whispered that if I was gentle, I could touch her butt. I said I meant her tail. She turned crimson, shot up, stormed out without closing the door, and yelled, "Stupid master," from the hallway. I smiled. She was definitely interested. Footsteps on the stairs. Ellie and Lilith came up fresh from their baths. Ellie walked into my room automatically. She'd started coming every night without being asked to let me pet her ears before sleep. Lilith followed and sat on my other side. Ellie looked at her and asked why she kept following her everywhere. Lilith answered coolly that she wasn't following Ellie. The master had told her he needed her body to serve him at night. Ellie leaned forward and stared at me after Lilith's comment about serving me with her body. The room went dead silent. Her expression looked innocent, but her eyes were unsettling. I started sweating. I quickly explained that Lilith had mentioned being skilled at seduction, and I'd only wanted to test her abilities. Nothing more. Lilith turned to me and asked if she could begin. I was too scared of Ellie to answer. Somehow I ended up asking Ellie for permission. She thought about it briefly and said go ahead. Lilith wrapped her arms around me. Her sharp eyes softened into something alluring. She purred that my chest felt strong. My brain short-circuited in about 2.5 seconds. I had zero defense against this type of woman. A faint smell of jealousy drifted from Ellie's direction. Lilith smiled and asked if I was shy. Before I could respond, Maeve's head appeared in the doorway. She'd been woken by the noise. She saw Lilith draped over me, and the room went silent. Maeve charged in, face red, grabbed a blanket, and threw it over my lap. She declared this was absolutely unacceptable, hugged me from behind, and tried to shoo Lilith away, saying she and Ellie were here first and Lilith would have to wait her turn. Lilith gave her an icy look. I waved my hands and said everyone could calm down. There was plenty of me to go around. Maeve didn't budge from her protective position. I sighed and told Lilith the free preview was over. The paid content would have to wait. Lilith smoothed her clothes and returned to normal instantly. Maeve squeezed my neck and called me the most perverted master alive. I asked why she cared so much. She stammered, couldn't form a sentence, then blurted out that her sister said that kind of activity was bad for men's health, and if I died they'd all die too because of the slave brand. She seemed proud of this logic. I pointed out that once or twice wouldn't kill anyone. She got flustered and said what if Lilith accidentally snapped my neck during the act, since she was as strong as Ellie. I'd worried about the same thing before, but had since made peace with it. No risk, no reward. I asked if I could touch Maeve instead since she was safer. She went completely red, mumbled, no, and fled the room yelling that she'd be watching me and I wasn't allowed to do anything inappropriate. After she left, Lilith was still sitting there waiting. She had no beast ears, just a long, thin snake tail. Nothing to play with tonight. I told her to go sleep. She bowed and left, saying to call if I needed anything. Now it was just Ellie and me. She gently bumped my shoulder with her head. I asked what was up. She yawned and pointed at her room. Time for bed. She was wearing that light blue low-cut dress, and the view from the neckline was devastating. I swallowed hard. She noticed me staring, but unlike Maeve, she didn't hide anything. She just let me look. I tried to convince her to stay and hang out. She refused. She was tired from 2 days underground. I suggested she could sleep right here, and I'd help her relax. She just looked at me without answering. We sat there in a standoff for a long time. Then she broke the silence with a question. Do you really enjoy being seduced? I woke up to something tickling my nose. Maeve was sitting on my bed using the tip of her wolf tail to make me sneeze. I swatted at her and tried to go back to sleep. She squeezed my cheeks gently and reminded me I'd said we were getting up early. Also, she was hungry. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was her backside in those old patched clothes. I grabbed it without thinking. She yelped, covered her butt, and fled to the doorway with a red face. Ellie and Lilith were already up, standing quietly behind her. I told Maeve she should get used to it. I'd probably be messing with her for the rest of her life. She got weirdly shy and mumbled, "Really?" in a hopeful tone. That caught me off guard. I beckoned her back for round 2, but she refused and ran off. On the way to the tavern, I was quiet thinking about last night. After Lilith and Maeve had left, Ellie had asked me straight up if I enjoyed being seduced. I tried to lie, but ended up confessing. I was completely weak against the mature seductress type, and Lilith could break me with minimal effort. Ellie had said nothing and just walked out. Maeve noticed my silence and asked if I was upset. I sighed and said I was disappointed about not getting to touch her properly. She blushed and reminded me I'd already grabbed her this morning. We bickered the whole way to the tavern. I ordered a stewed chicken and stew for each of us, 20 silver total. Only 20 left afterward. If today didn't bring good income, I'd need to cut back. Maeve was acting strange. She insisted on swapping her chicken with mine. No reason given. I suspected a trick and inspected both. Hers actually looked bigger. She kept begging until I gave in. Then she finished eating and leaned against me contentedly, swinging her legs. She'd been unusually physical all morning, bumping me with her hip, leaning on me, fanning me when I said I was hot. I confronted her. Was she cursed? Did she do something wrong and was trying to butter me up? She insisted she was just in a good mood. I didn't fully buy it. Evelyn came over and commented on how lavishly I was eating, one meal costing what some people paid in rent for half a year. She handed me a small, heavy pouch, 7 gold coins. 5 were a bonus from Vitter for saving his life, and 2 were my pay for the underground expedition minus the cost of lost water skins and consumed supplies. Fair math. I asked about work for today. Evelyn said she'd hire me to go upstairs and play with Mira again, same pay as before. The kid hadn't seen me in 3 days and was driving Evelyn crazy begging for me. She tried to keep her cool exterior, but I could hear something close to pleading in her voice. Maeve jumped in supporting the idea, saying we all needed rest, and Ellie was clearly exhausted. Then she added something that made me pause. She said there was something she wanted to tell me. Mira was sitting on the floor at the top of the stairs looking bored. The moment she saw me, her face lit up, and she bolted down to hug me, complaining that I'd been gone for days and didn't come see her even after getting back yesterday. I pinched her cheek and picked her up. Maeve greeted Mira enthusiastically. Mira gave her a flat, "Oh, you again." Then she noticed Lilith behind us and hid her face in my shoulder. Since the kidnapping, she'd become nervous around strangers. Lilith introduced herself as my slave. Her aggressive-looking face probably didn't help with first impressions. I asked Mira what she wanted to do. She said she didn't want to play. She wanted to study magic. Her mom told her that learning magic meant she wouldn't have to be afraid of bad people anymore. That was fine with me. I could use Evelyn's books to learn something new too. Maeve pouted and said she wanted to play. I told her Ellie and Lilith could keep her company. She nuzzled my shoulder and said she wanted to play with me specifically. I promised to find her after spending time with Mira. In the study, Mira and I sat at the desk with a heavy spellbook. Maeve peeked at the dense text, said it was boring, and wandered off to Myra's room. Ellie found a corner and closed her eyes. Lilith sat across from her and did the same. She was a fast learner, copying whatever others did. I put Mira down and went to sit by Lilith. I needed to get her encyclopedia bonus. I asked what our relationship was. She said master and slave. I pushed further. She said master and tool, then master and object of wrath, each answer more bizarre than the last. I gave up being subtle and asked directly if we were good friends. She said no, we were master and slave. I insisted, we are good friends. She repeated it obediently. I added, and very close friends. She repeated that too. The system registered it. Affection level 2, friendship achieved. My total stat boost jumped to 50%. But the system noted she had to truly believe it for level 3, and right now she was just parroting my words. Fine. It would happen eventually. I patted her head and called her a good girl. Her loyalty hit 99%. Ellie had been resting across the room, but her cat ears were standing straight up, eavesdropping on everything. I went over and asked to test my grip strength again. She squeezed my hand. Even with a 50% boost, she still crushed me easily. I offered to massage her ears to help her sleep. She glanced at me and firmly refused. She just wanted to sit and rest quietly. I went back to the desk, picked up Mira, and started reading the spellbook. I spent most of the morning flipping through Evelyn's spellbooks with Mira on my lap. Wind blades, lightning strikes, all sorts of exotic magic, but nothing really grabbed me. Mira said her mom always told her magic was boring by nature, and the fun spells were usually the useless ones. Then Mira remembered something. She said there was a magic called command that could force anything to obey your words. Not like the slave brand. This worked on objects, people, everything. Tell a book to explode, and it would. Tell a person to stop, and they couldn't move. She dug through the entire bookshelf and found a black book with a purple skull on the cover. The spell was on the last page. As I read, it got more and more insane. This was ancient demon magic, essentially the power to alter reality through spoken commands. If someone attacked me with a knife, I could say, "Get away," and an invisible force would blast them back. Say, "Explode," and they'd pop like a balloon. The catch: if the caster wasn't skilled enough or the target was too powerful, the spell would backfire. Minor cases meant dizziness and blood from the mouth. Severe cases meant instant heart failure. The mage who documented it specifically warned that humans could barely learn it. I asked Mira if Evelyn could use this spell. She nodded miserably. Whenever her mom got angry, she'd say, "Don't move," and Mira would freeze completely, unable to lift a finger. I laughed and said she was probably just scared stiff. She insisted it was real magic. My first thought, I need to practice this on Maeve. Mira asked again if she could be with me when she grew up. I looked at her and said sorry. She was too young, and I preferred mature women. Like her mother. Mira immediately asked if I'd be her dad then, so I could be around every day. I told her I was joking and begged her not to tell Evelyn or she'd kill me. Maeve barged in demanding attention. She'd been bored all morning since nobody would play with her. She wanted rock, paper, scissors. I agreed, with the usual rule that losers got their ears touched. She accepted instantly, which meant ears weren't enough punishment anymore. I raised the stakes and pointed at her chest. She went red. I expected her to refuse. Instead, she went quiet for a few seconds, then said she didn't want to play the game after all. She had something to tell me, something she'd been too embarrassed to say downstairs with everyone around. She lowered her head and spoke softly. She wanted to stay with me forever. She knew she was dumb and useless, but she'd always listen and do whatever I said. Even that kind of thing. She asked if that was okay. I looked at Maeve's serious face and realized what was happening. She was making her move. I asked what about Ellie. She shrugged and said they'd figure that out later. I asked if she meant she didn't mind sharing. She didn't understand the hint, so I whispered the explanation. She wasn't bothered at all. She told me she had 2 mothers, and her aunt had 3 husbands. For beastkin, having multiple partners was normal as long as you had the means, but you couldn't neglect any of them. I asked if 10 was okay. She laughed and said her sister always claimed men couldn't even handle 1, let alone 10. I said I had a plan. I asked if this meant we could get physical. She tilted her head and asked what stepping on each other's backs meant. Was it some kind of food? Looking at her innocent face thinking about eating, I couldn't bring myself to just undress her. I leaned in and whispered the real meaning. At first, she listened with curiosity. Then her expression changed. She scooted away, clutching her chest, and said this was too fast. We'd only known each other a few days. But she added that I could do other things in the meantime. She lowered her arms from her chest, face burning red. I'd been waiting for this. I reached out with both hands. "What game are you playing? Can I join?" Myra's voice came from behind me. She was standing in the doorway holding a spell book, and right behind her was Ellie, watching silently. I panicked and said we were playing tag. Maeve started to say, "Weren't you about to squeeze my?" And I slapped my hand over her mouth. Mira wanted to play. I said the game was for adults only. She pouted and insisted she was grown up. I pulled her into my lap and tickled her instead. Then Evelyn appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an amused expression. The moment I looked up, she wiped it clean, but Maeve had already seen her smiling. Evelyn checked that Mira had been studying, then turned to leave. But Mira called out to her and dropped a bomb. Mama, let Ryan be my dad so he can play with me every day. Evelyn shot me a look, then threatened Mira with a spanking if she said anything like that again. Mira doubled down, saying she loved me so much that if she weren't so young, she'd want to be my wife. I sat there grinning like an idiot. Evelyn grabbed Myra's ear. The kid begged for mercy. I tapped Evelyn's hand and told her not to be so rough. Kids say silly things. She let go and muttered that if Mira was saying things like this at 6, imagine what she'd be like at 16. Then Mira delivered the killing blow. Ryan told me at lunch that he really likes you, Mama. He was just too embarrassed to say it himself. My stomach dropped. I told her that as a secret. She'd promised not to tell. Now she'd blurted it out like it was nothing. I couldn't meet Evelyn's eyes. I scrambled to deny it, calling Mira a liar and telling her she was making things up. Mira pouted and said she wasn't lying. She was just helping me say what I couldn't. Then she hugged me tight and begged, please be my dad. Everyone else has a dad except me. I want one too. I went silent. I slowly glanced up at Evelyn. Our eyes met. That tavern owner is definitely into you, Maeve announced the moment we got home. I was sitting at the table, exhausted, with a borrowed spellbook in front of me. I'd grabbed it from Evelyn as an excuse to flee after Myra's catastrophic reveal. Maeve insisted she'd seen Evelyn smile at the doorway watching me play with Mira, a genuine, warm smile she'd never seen before. I told her she was making things up. She said to ask Ellie. Ellie, carrying my dirty clothes to the bathroom, glanced at us and said she didn't know. Maeve looked frustrated. I told Maeve to just go take a bath and sleep. She got flustered and said she wanted to sleep alone tonight. She wasn't ready yet. I joked that I'd come to her room instead. She panicked and clarified she meant completely alone. I told her I was kidding. After she left, Ellie pulled up a chair next to me without saying anything. Then she leaned over and brushed her ear against my cheek and said one word. Touch. I happily obliged. While I was stroking her ears, she said something unexpected. If there's anything going on, tell me about it. I wasn't sure what she meant by that. I asked her seriously if she considered us close friends. She looked at me and said, today is the 8th day since you bought me. Only 8 days. It felt like a month. But in just 1 week, we'd gone from 0 to ear-touching and tail-grabbing territory. At this rate, I'd have her fully won over within a month. She stood up and said she was going to wash my clothes. After my bath, I headed upstairs. Passing Maeve's door, it flew open and a hand yanked me inside. She'd tidied her room perfectly. Neat bed, clean floor, even a purple flower on the windowsill that she'd found on the street. Definitely stolen, pot and all. She said she just wanted to talk. Then I noticed she hadn't wrapped her chest after bathing. Without the binding, things looked significantly larger than usual. The view through her loose shirt was overwhelming. She noticed me staring and sat on the bed, blushing. She said she didn't understand what was so fascinating about them. Ellie and Lilith were downstairs in the bath. We were alone on the 2nd floor. I pounced. The candle blew out. In the dark, I could hear her breathing hard, her skin burning hot. After a while, she whimpered that I was bullying her again. I was just playing with her tail. Her wolf tail wasn't as pleasant to touch as Ellie's cat tail, fluffier looking but coarser in hand. She said she couldn't take it anymore and wanted to bite me. I asked how beastkin tails could be so sensitive. She pushed my face away with tears in her eyes, said she felt strange, then bolted out the door barefoot without even grabbing her shoes. Next morning, I took everyone to the market to buy armor. We'd been walking around with nothing but the clothes on our backs, and I figured it was time to look at least somewhat professional. I wanted hard leather armor for Ellie and Lilith. Maeve said she'd take whatever. She was being unusually quiet and awkward. After last night's tail incident, she'd locked herself in the kitchen until morning. I asked what she'd been doing in there all night. She turned red and stammered that she was hungry and went to eat bread. I smiled and let it go. The proper armor shop was way too expensive. Basic plate armor cost 120 silver, nearly 4 gold. Way out of my budget. I found a traveling leathersmith from a village instead, selling affordable hardened leather pieces. The armor was solid, wax-treated leather hard as wood, good enough to stop goblin arrows. But when the craftsman heard I was buying for female slaves, he looked at the girls and frowned. Their shoulders were narrow, but their chests were not. He pointed at Maeve and said her size would literally burst his armor. I found fits for Ellie and Lilith without much trouble. Maeve was impossible. Nothing could contain her. I was sweating trying to force the chest piece closed while she gasped that she couldn't breathe. I ended up asking for longer side laces and leaving gaps. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. 4 sets cost 5 gold coins. Then I realized Lilith had no weapons. I asked what she used. She rattled off a list. Daggers, short bows, throwing knives, hand axes, javelins, blow darts. I stopped her and asked for her top 3: blow dart, dagger, throwing knives. I was skeptical. Those were fine against people, but useless against large monsters. She opened her mouth and showed me her venomous fangs. 1 dose of her venom diluted in water could kill thousands. She could coat any weapon with it. I gave her my dagger and bought 2 sets of throwing knives, 20-something silver total. Maeve poked me and pointed out she had no weapon now. I told her we were both mascots. Our job was to watch Ellie and Lilith work. At the tavern for breakfast, I studied the borrowed spellbook while eating. I noticed Lilith staring at me constantly. I told her she didn't need permission to eat. Just start when the food arrived. But even after eating, she kept watching me. I asked why. She said she just wanted to look. Weird, but harmless. Evelyn came over looking different. She was wearing light makeup today, which made her even more stunning. She stood there silently. I told her I'd return the book in a few days. She nodded, then said Mira wanted to spend time with me again and asked if I was free. I turned down Evelyn's offer to babysit Mira again. 1 rest day was enough. With 3 extra mouths to feed, I couldn't afford another. She didn't push it, just said to let her know when I was free. Then a stuffed doll hit me in the head. Mira was peeking out from behind the kitchen doorway, looking pitiful. Since the kidnapping, she'd been too scared to leave the kitchen. I crouched in front of her, and she threw her arms around my head, begging me to stay and play. I told her I had to go earn money. She clung tighter and started crying. Evelyn peeled her off and dragged her upstairs, ignoring the tears completely. Maeve watched and said it reminded her of when her older sister got married. She'd cried just as hard, and her father slapped her twice to make her stop. That led to her casually mentioning that her father was a violent drunk who beat her mothers regularly. He'd had 3 wives, but 1 died from the beatings when Maeve was small. At 16, Maeve was still getting hit. Yet women in their village still wanted to marry him because he was strong and had a big plot of farmland. I changed the subject. That world was brutal, and I didn't want to dwell on it. While we waited for Evelyn, a familiar figure walked into the tavern. Vitor, in full custom plate armor, looking completely fine despite having a broken leg 2 days ago. He spotted me and marched over, ordering me to join another underground expedition. I said no, too dangerous, and I had no supplies. One of his attendants called me a peasant. Vitor snapped at him, reminding everyone I'd saved his life down there. Then he offered the real terms: for gold coins per day, half a day to prepare, departure in the afternoon. For gold a day. My heart skipped. I nudged Ellie and asked her opinion. She shrugged, didn't care either way. Vitor was confused about why I was consulting a slave. I told him she was my wife. His attendants exchanged looks, but nobody said anything. I accepted the job. After Vitor left, Evelyn came back downstairs and noticed something had happened. I told her about the underground mission and the 4 gold per day pay. She commented that I was getting famous enough for nobles to come directly to me instead of going through her tavern. She sat at the counter and seemed to wrestle with something for a moment. Then she asked, in a half-joking tone, if I wanted to keep you. How much would that cost? Maeve's expression shifted from serious to a sly grin. Nearby mercenaries started cheering and raising their cups. Evelyn was beautiful, rich, and ran the most popular tavern in town. Her magic book collection alone was worth a fortune, hundreds of rare volumes that you couldn't even find in a small city like Calydorn. Anyone could see she was wealthy beyond what a tavern should produce. I was tempted. My stomach had always been weak. I was built for the soft life. But I had a mission. 100 beast-eared girls. I couldn't let comfort derail me. I grabbed Evelyn's hand dramatically and told her she was wonderful, but I had other duties and couldn't hold her back. The tavern went silent. The mercenaries deflated and muttered about wasted opportunities. Evelyn quietly pulled her hand away and sat back behind the counter. I leaned over and asked if she was angry. She said it was just a joke and not to worry about it. I exhaled with relief. Maeve elbowed me and asked why I'd turned down the owner of a whole tavern. We'd never run out of meat. I told her I couldn't stop yet. Others were waiting for me out there. She said she'd rather just have something to eat. I bought supplies from Evelyn, then went upstairs to see Mira before we left. She was crouching at the top of the stairs. When she saw me, she puffed up her cheeks and charged, punching me with her tiny fists. She'd overheard the conversation downstairs and demanded to know why I wouldn't be her dad. I stroked her ears and told her that if I became her father, I couldn't be her man when she grew up. Her brain froze for a moment. Then she let go and declared she'd definitely be prettier than her mom in 10 years. I told her to keep that between us. Maeve muttered that I was the worst person alive. In the study, I read spell books with Mira while Ellie and Lilith rested in the corner. Maeve played rock, paper, scissors against herself. Eventually, I got bored and asked Lilith who was stronger between her and Ellie. Lilith answered immediately, Ellie, without question. She said Ellie could fight 3 opponents at once and was called a once-in-a-century female warrior on the island. Ellie turned her back to us, pretending to sleep. She clearly didn't want to hear this conversation. I asked Lilith how she knew Ellie. She said Ellie was famous on the island. I assumed it was because of her strength. Lilith said no, that wasn't the reason. I wanted to press further, but decided to ask another time since Ellie was right there. Lilith yawned and said she hadn't been sleeping well either, the same drug from the island that plagued Ellie. I patted my lap and offered the same treatment. She lay down without hesitation and fell drowsy within minutes from the head massage. Her skin was surprisingly cold, like a reptile. No wonder she loved sunbathing. Ellie suddenly turned around and stared at me. Then without a word she walked over and laid her head on my other thigh. I thought she'd fall asleep quickly too, but instead she started talking. She said she'd once had a friend on the island, but friendship was forbidden for slaves. They were caught. The slave master ordered them to fight each other to the death. Ellie won. Then she had to execute her friend in front of everyone. She asked me to stop asking about the island. It was too painful. She didn't want to remember anymore.